Touch me again, and I will have you removed from this building in handcuffs, pregnant or not." The slap came before the sentence finished echoing. Open palm, full swing, connecting with the left side of her face hard enough to knock her earring loose and send it skittering across the marble floor like a dropped coin. 214 guests at the Kavanaugh Foundation's annual Healthcare Heroes Gala saw it happen. Not one of them moved. Sterling Kavanaugh had just struck a 7 months pregnant woman in front of every camera phone in Houston's Grand Ballroom. What he did not know, what nobody at Table 14 could have known, was that the quiet man she'd married 3 years ago had once ordered the disappearance of a cargo ship in the South China Sea with a single phone call, and that right now, at 11 minutes past 8 on a Friday evening, that man's phone was vibrating on a nightstand 6 miles away. The woman in the navy blue dress did not scream, did not fall. She caught herself with one hand flat on the tablecloth, knocking over a water glass that nobody would remember later, and with her other hand she reached for her belly. 7 months, 30 weeks. The gesture was involuntary. Not performance, not theater, just a mother's body doing what a mother's body does when threat registers faster than thought. Her left cheek burned. Her earring lay somewhere under a stranger's chair. The string quartet in the corner had stopped playing. 3 tables away, a woman who had been filming the floral centerpiece on her phone forgot to stop recording. The timestamp read, October 11th, 8:23 p.m. The audio picked up everything. A male voice, loud and accustomed to owning every room it entered. "Get your hands off my jacket. Do you have any idea what this costs?" The sound of impact. Flat, sharp, unmistakable. A collective gasp. Then silence so complete you could hear champagne bubbles dying in 200 glasses. If you think a billionaire can slap a pregnant woman and walk away untouched, you need to keep watching, because what happens next will prove you wrong. The man in the gray Tom Ford suit adjusted his cuffs, said something to the aide at his elbow, something short, dismissive, a sentence designed to erase the last 10 seconds from the historical record. Then he turned and walked toward the stage, parting the crowd the way money always parts crowds, with the easy confidence of someone who has never once been told no by anyone who mattered. Nobody stopped him. Nobody checked on her. The security guard nearest to table 14 looked at his shoes. The event coordinator, a tall blonde woman in a cream pantsuit, appeared at the table like she had materialized from the air conditioning duct. "Are you all right? Can I get you some water? I'm sure Mr. Kavanaugh didn't mean... It was just a misunderstanding." The words came out polished and practiced, the verbal equivalent of a damp cloth wiping blood off marble before anyone notices the stain. The woman in the navy dress looked at her, did not blink, did not accept the water, did not agree that it was a misunderstanding. "I need this documented," she said. Her voice was steady, not calm exactly, but controlled, the way a person's voice sounds when their training overrides their pain. "I need the names of the security staff on duty, their badge numbers, and a formal incident report filed with your supervisor before I leave this room." The event coordinator's smile thinned. Documentation was not what she had been sent to offer. She had been sent to offer water, an apology that admitted nothing, and a gentle suggestion that perhaps the guest had been standing too close, perhaps the lighting was misleading, perhaps what 200 people had just witnessed with their own eyes hadn't actually happened. "I understand you're upset. Let me get our guest services manager." You can get your guest services manager, your security director, and the name of whoever is responsible for this venue's liability insurance. I was assaulted, in front of witnesses, while visibly pregnant. That is a crime under Texas law, and I expect it to be treated as one. She said it without raising her voice, without trembling, without any of the emotional performance that people expect from women who have just been hit. And that absence, that eerie, practiced composure, made the event coordinator take a half step backward, because something about this woman did not match the story that was already being written. The story said, "Unfortunate guest, wrong place, wrong time, probably did something to provoke it, these things happen." The woman standing at table 14 with a red handprint blooming across her left cheek said something else entirely. But nobody was listening to that story yet. Not yet. Imani Okafor picked up her clutch from the table, found her earring under the chair where it had landed, a small gold hoop, bent now, the clasp broken. She put it in her purse, straightened her dress, walked out of the Houston Grand Ballroom through the service corridor because she knew, from years of navigating spaces that were not designed to hold people who looked like her, that the service corridor would be empty, and that emptiness was the closest thing to safety she could find right now. She did not cry until she was inside her car with the doors locked and the engine running. Then she cried for exactly 90 seconds, timed, though she didn't know she was timing it, by the song that was playing on the radio when she started and the song that replaced it when she stopped. Then she wiped her face with a napkin from the glove compartment, put the car in drive, and headed for the emergency room at Street, Luke's medical center, because she was a nurse and she knew that the most important thing she could do right now was create a medical record. The ER attending, Dr. Reina Vasquez, a woman who had seen enough domestic violence to recognize the geography of a slap without being told, examined her in Trauma Bay 4, documented the findings with the clinical precision that would matter later, in rooms where clinical precision was the only language that counted. Patient. Okafor, Imani. Arrived 21:47 hours. Chief complaint. Facial contusion following reported assault. Patient is G1P0 at 30 weeks gestation. Left cheek erythema and mild edema consistent with open-hand blunt force impact. No loss of consciousness. Fetal heart tones 142, reassuring, reactive strip. Patient declined narcotic pain management due to pregnancy. Patient reports incident occurred at a public event. Law enforcement not yet contacted. Social work consult offered. Patient declined, stating she would file a report independently. Disposition, discharged with follow-up instructions and obstetric precautions. Dr. Vasquez handed her the discharge papers, looked at her with the kind of professional concern that is almost indistinguishable from personal sadness. "You know this is documented now," the doctor said. "Whatever you decide to do next, this is on the record." Imani took the papers. "That's why I came." She drove home. The townhouse in Midtown, a 2-story brick row house in a neighborhood that split the difference between gentrified and genuine, was dark except for the kitchen light. Jun-ho had left it on for her, the way he always did when she worked late, even though she'd told him 100 times that the electricity bill didn't care about his gestures. He was at the kitchen table when she walked in. Not sleeping, not reading, just sitting, with his phone face down on the table and a cup of tea that had gone cold. He looked up when the door opened, and his eyes went straight to her face, to the left cheek, where the swelling had started to darken into something that would be purple by morning. He did not ask what happened. He stood up, crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and took her face in both hands, gently, the way you hold something that might break, and tilted her chin toward the light. His thumbs traced the edges of the bruise without pressing. His breathing did not change. His expression did not shift. He simply looked at the injury the way a man looks at a map before deciding which road to take. "Who?" he said. One word, not a question exactly. A request for coordinates. "Sterling Kavanaugh, at the gala. He slapped me because I spilled water on his jacket, in front of 200 people." Jun-ho released her face, stepped back, pulled out a chair for her to sit, poured fresh tea, set it in front of her. Then he picked up his phone, walked into the garage, and closed the door behind him. She heard his voice through the wall, low, rapid, in Korean. A language she understood in fragments. She caught the word for hospital, the word for tonight, a name she didn't recognize. Then silence. Then the garage door opening and the sound of his car starting, and then nothing. He came back 40 minutes later. Did not say where he'd gone. Sat beside her on the couch, put his hand on her belly, felt the baby kick against his palm, and said, "Tell me everything. What time? Which table? Who else was seated there? What he was wearing? What he said before? What he said after? The questions were precise, sequential, structured like an interrogation, though Imani wouldn't have used that word. She would have said he was being thorough, that he cared about details, that he was the kind of man who believed problems could be solved if you gathered enough information first. She told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once. "I'll handle the rest." "Junho, I'm filing a police report tomorrow. I don't need you to file the report. That's your right. But there are other things that need to happen too, things I can help with." She wanted to ask what things, what help, who he'd called from the garage, but she was tired. The kind of tired that lives behind your eyes and makes the world feel like it's being viewed through gauze. And the baby was kicking again, and the bruise on her face was throbbing in time with her heartbeat, and so she let it go. Let him bring her ice wrapped in a dish towel. Let him lead her to bed. Let him sit in the dark beside her until her breathing slowed and sleep pulled her under. She did not see him leave the bedroom after she fell asleep. Did not see him open the locked leather bag he kept in the hall closet, the one she had never asked about, the one with the combination lock that he changed every 2 weeks. Did not see him pull out 3 phones, all of them identical black Samsungs with no cases and no contacts saved. Did not see him open a folder of photographs. Sterling Kavanaugh entering and exiting buildings, getting into cars, shaking hands with city officials, with dates going back 6 months. Junho Park had known about Sterling Kavanaugh long before the gala. The question was why? And that question would not be answered for a very long time. 2 weeks before the night that divided Imani Okafor's life into before and after, she had been standing in the break room of Houston Memorial's labor and delivery unit, eating a granola bar and trying to ignore the ache in her lower back that had become her constant companion since the 3rd trimester began. The break room was a 10 by 12 box with a microwave that smelled like reheated fish, a refrigerator covered in passive-aggressive notes about labeling your food, and a window that looked out onto the parking garage. It was the only room on the 4th floor where nurses could sit without being needed, which meant it was the only room where the things that couldn't be said at the nurses' station got said. Jolene Marsh walked in at 7:45 a.m., carrying a yogurt and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Jolene was senior charge nurse, 15 years on the unit, white, early 40s, with the kind of institutional knowledge that made her indispensable, and the kind of social instincts that made her dangerous. She sat on the Kavanaugh Foundation's Community Advisory Board. She organized the unit's participation in the Foundation's annual charity initiatives. She was, in every measurable way, the gatekeeper between Houston Memorial's nursing staff and the philanthropy dollars that funded equipment upgrades, conference attendance, and the annual Healthcare Heroes Gala. "Imani, congratulations. You're one of our nominees for the gala this year." She said it brightly, like she was announcing a promotion, like being nominated was a gift rather than an obligation. "I appreciate that, Jolene, but I'm 30 weeks. I'm not sure I'm up for a formal event." "Oh, it's nothing strenuous. Dinner, a few speeches, maybe a photo with Mr. Kavanaugh. You've earned it. Your patient satisfaction scores are the highest on the unit." Imani had not asked for her patient satisfaction scores to be high. She had simply done her job, assessed, medicated, educated, documented, comforted, with the same precision she brought to everything. The scores were a byproduct of competence, not a goal. But scores were the language hospitals spoke, and Jolene spoke it fluently. "I'll think about it. The invitation is for you +1. Will your husband be joining?" Jolene's voice carried the particular cadence of someone asking a question they already know the answer to, or at least think they do. She had met Junho once, at a hospital holiday party, and had spent the rest of the evening asking Imani questions about him with the barely concealed fascination of someone who found interracial marriages interesting in the way that people find exotic animals interesting, from a safe distance, with mild confusion about the logistics. "He has a work commitment that night. I'll probably come alone." "That's fine. Just make sure you're comfortable standing for photos, with the baby and everything." The sentence was perfectly constructed. Concern wrapped around condescension, wrapped around a reminder that Imani's pregnant body was a variable that needed to be managed. Jolene delivered it with a smile and left the break room before Imani could decide whether to respond. Later that same day, a call came to the unit manager's office from the Kavanaugh Foundation's events coordinator, a woman named Margot Lydon, whose voice on the phone carried the practiced warmth of someone who had been trained to sound sincere. She wanted to confirm the details of Houston Memorial's nominee. Was Imani Okafor the right representative? Would she fit the profile of the evening's program? Were there any concerns the hospital wanted to flag in advance? The unit manager, a pragmatic woman named Sandra, who had survived 22 years of hospital politics by knowing which fights to pick, relayed the call to Imani with a raised eyebrow and a single comment. She asked 3 times if you were comfortable representing the hospital. I told her you delivered a breech baby last month with one hand while calling the NICU with the other. She didn't seem to know what to do with that information. Imani filed the interaction away. Not in her memory. Memory was unreliable, subject to revision, vulnerable to the softening effects of time. She filed it in the spiral notebook she kept in her locker, the one with the black cover and no label, where she recorded dates, times, names, and direct quotes with the methodical attention of someone who had learned, long ago, that the difference between a story and evidence was documentation. The gala was 2 weeks away. The bruise on her face did not exist yet. Sterling Kavanaugh was still just a name on a building, a name she associated with donated ventilators and ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and the vague, impersonal generosity of men who gave money to hospitals the way they gave tips to valets, as a gesture of dominance disguised as kindness. In 2 weeks, that name would be associated with something else entirely. But first, she had patients to see. The morning of October 11th, the day of the gala, Imani woke at 5:15 a.m. to the sound of Junho in the kitchen. He was making doenjang jigai, fermented soybean stew, his mother's recipe, the one he made when he wanted the house to smell like home. The pot was already simmering when she came downstairs, and 2 bowls were set on the table with chopsticks laid parallel, handles pointing right, spaced exactly 1 inch apart. He did this every morning. Not the stew. That was a weekend indulgence brought forward because today felt like a day that needed anchoring. But the arrangement. The precision. Shoes by the front door lined up left to right in order of size, angled at identical degrees. Towels in the bathroom folded into thirds, never halves, stacked with the open edge facing away from the door. Every window lock checked before bed, every night in the same sequence. Kitchen, living room, guest bath, bedroom. A circuit he completed in under 90 seconds without variation. Imani had noticed these habits early in their relationship and filed them under neat. 3 years of marriage had not revised that assessment, though occasionally, when she watched him scan a parking lot before choosing a space, or memorize the license plates of cars parked on their street, or wake from sleep at the sound of a footstep on the sidewalk outside, she felt the edge of a question she was not ready to ask. "You don't have to go tonight," he said, setting the stew in front of her. "If you don't want to." "I already told them I'd be there." Obligations can be revised, not when they come from the people who decide your shift assignments. He accepted this with a nod, sat across from her, ate in the comfortable silence of a marriage that had learned when words were useful and when they were just noise. His phone sat on the table between them. Not the phone she knew. The one with the blue case and the cracked screen protector. A different phone. Black. No case. She had seen it before, always briefly, always at moments when he was between conversations she was not part of. "Will you be home tonight?" she asked. "I have a logistics issue at the port. Might run late." "On a Friday night?" "Containers don't know what day it is." He smiled. She smiled back. The stew was good. The baby kicked. The morning was ordinary in every way that mattered and extraordinary in every way she couldn't see. At the hospital, the day unfolded with the controlled urgency that was the labor and delivery unit's permanent setting. 2 scheduled C-sections. 1 emergency transfer from a birthing center where things had gone wrong. A teenager in room 420 who had arrived alone, scared, 17 years old, and needed someone to hold her hand through 12 hours of labor. Imani held it. Through the contractions, and the screaming, and the moment, always the same moment, in every delivery, when the pain became transcendent, and the screaming became something else, something animal and ancient and powerful, and the baby came into the world crying because that was what living things did when they arrived somewhere unfamiliar. She clocked out at 6:30 p.m., drove home, showered, put on the navy dress, the only formal dress that still fit over her belly, a simple A-line she'd bought at a consignment shop in Montrose for $40. No jewelry, except the small gold hoops that Jun-ho had given her on their first anniversary, and her wedding ring, a plain band that she wore on her right hand because her fingers had swollen during the second trimester and the left hand wouldn't hold it anymore. She drove to the grand ballroom alone. Jun-ho's logistics emergency had materialized, as she'd expected. He had texted, "Be safe. I love you. Call me when you leave." She had replied with a thumbs-up emoji that she immediately regretted, because it seemed too casual for a man who had made her breakfast and checked every lock in the house before leaving. The ballroom was on the second floor of the Houston Grand Hotel, a gilded cavern of crystal chandeliers, white linen, and the particular smell of wealth that is equal parts expensive cologne, cut flowers, and the invisible pheromone of people who believe they are better than the people serving them dinner. Margot Lydon met her at the registration table. Tall, blonde, mid-40s, wearing a cream pantsuit that cost more than Imani's monthly car payment. Her handshake was firm but brief, the kind of handshake you give someone you are processing rather than welcoming. "Imani, so glad you could make it. You look wonderful. Let me show you to your table." Table 14 was in the back corner of the ballroom, adjacent to the service corridor, partially obscured by a structural pillar that blocked the view of the stage. The other nominees, 3 white nurses and an Asian American physician's assistant from other hospitals, were seated at table 2, front and center, with unobstructed sight lines and proximity to the podium where Sterling Kavanaugh would deliver his keynote. "We had to shuffle some seating at the last minute," Margot explained, without explaining why. "I hope you don't mind. The acoustics are actually better back here." They were not. What was better back here was invisibility. Imani had been placed where she would appear in no photographs, hear no speeches clearly, and interact with no one of consequence. She had been invited to be counted and seated to be forgotten. She sat down, did not complain, unfolded her napkin, placed it in her lap, and began the work of surviving an evening designed to remind her, in 1,000 small ways, that her presence was tolerated rather than desired. The dinner was 4 courses. She ate 2 of them. The third, a seared duck breast with truffle reduction, arrived cold because the service corridor was long and table 14 was the last stop on the route. The fourth, a chocolate torte, she skipped because the nausea that had plagued her first trimester had made a third trimester comeback, triggered by the combination of rich food and the particular anxiety that comes from being the only black woman in a room who is not carrying a tray. Sterling Kavanaugh arrived at 8:02 p.m., preceded by 2 aides, and trailed by a woman in a red dress who laughed at everything he said with the precision of someone who was paid to find him amusing. He was 54, white, built like a former athlete who had traded the gym for steakhouses 10 years ago and never looked back. His hair was silver at the temples, the kind of silver that men's magazines call distinguished and that women's magazines call aging. His suit was gray, Tom Ford, his shoes were Italian leather, and his watch was a Patek Philippe that caught the light every time he gestured, which was constantly because Sterling Kavanaugh talked with his hands the way other men talked with their mouths, aggressively, expansively, occupying space that did not belong to him. He moved through the room like weather, shaking hands, gripping shoulders, placing his palm on the small of women's backs, with the proprietary confidence of a man who had never been asked to remove it. People flinched when he touched them. Then they smiled, because flinching at a billionaire's touch was socially acceptable only if followed immediately by gratitude. Imani watched from table 14, noted the pattern, the hand, the shoulder, the back, the casual, constant assertion of physical dominance dressed up as charisma. She had seen this behavior before, in patients' husbands who squeezed too hard when they held their wives' hands during labor, in attending physicians who stood too close during consultations, in every man who had ever mistaken proximity for connection and control for intimacy. She did not know that in 11 minutes that hand would be on her face. At 8:14 p.m., Sterling Kavanaugh began his lap of the ballroom, the pre-speech circuit that billionaires perform at charity events, a ritual of acknowledgement that functions as both greeting and inventory. He moved from table to table, spending 30 seconds at each, dispensing compliments and handshakes with the efficiency of a machine designed to produce the impression of warmth. He reached table 14 at 8:21 p.m. By then, Imani had finished her water and was reaching for the pitcher to refill her glass. The pitcher was heavy, crystal, overfilled, sweating with condensation. She lifted it with both hands, turned to pour, and her elbow caught the edge of Kavanaugh's jacket as he passed behind her chair. Water splashed. Not much. A few tablespoons, maybe, darkening a 3-inch strip of gray fabric on his left sleeve. The kind of minor accident that happens at every dinner party, at every table, in every ballroom in the world. The kind of accident that normal people handle with a napkin and a laugh. Sterling Kavanaugh was not a normal person. He stopped, looked down at his sleeve, looked at Imani. And in the space between looking and speaking, something shifted in his face. A recalibration, a decision, the visible moment when a man who is accustomed to deference encounters a woman who has not yet offered it and decides that the deficit must be corrected. "Are you serious right now?" Imani stood up. Reflexive, not aggressive, not confrontational, just the instinct to face a threat standing rather than sitting. "I'm sorry, it was an accident. Let me... Get your hands off my jacket. Do you have any idea what this costs? More than your entire year." She had not touched his jacket. Her hands were on the water pitcher, which she was trying to set down. But the accusation had already been made, the narrative already written. She had touched him. She had damaged his property. She was the aggressor, and he was the victim. The inversion was seamless, practiced. The rhetorical equivalent of a magic trick, performed so quickly that the audience saw only the result, never the mechanics. "Sir, I didn't touch your jacket. The water..." The slap came. It was not a punch, not a shove, an open-handed slap, delivered with the casual precision of a man who has hit people before and learned to do it in a way that hurts without leaving the kind of marks that complicate legal proceedings. Palm to cheek, left side, hard enough to turn her head, hard enough to knock loose the small gold earring that Junho had given her on their first anniversary. Imani caught herself on the table. Her hand found her belly. The baby kicked, hard, sudden, a movement that might have been response to the adrenaline flooding her bloodstream, or might have been coincidence. It didn't matter. What mattered was that a billionaire had just struck a pregnant woman in front of 200 witnesses, and what happened next would depend entirely on who those witnesses chose to believe. If this story is making your blood boil, hit subscribe right now, because we are just getting started, and the people who hurt this woman have no idea what's coming. The room did not erupt, did not gasp and rush forward, did not do any of the things that rooms full of decent people are supposed to do when they witness an act of violence against a pregnant woman. What the room did was freeze, a collective, instinctive, self-preserving paralysis that happens when power asserts itself in a way that makes choosing sides dangerous. Sterling Kavanaugh was a billionaire. The people in this room needed things from billionaires. The calculus was ugly but instantaneous. One man, seated at table 3, mid-50s, wearing a hospital administrator's name tag, half rose from his chair and then sat back down, the motion so brief it could have been attributed to a leg cramp. A woman at table 9 put her hand over her mouth and then removed it. A waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes stopped walking, looked at the floor, and resumed walking. Tate Renfro appeared at Kavanaugh's side within 15 seconds. Renfro was 41, Kavanaugh Corp's general counsel, a man whose entire professional existence was organized around the principle that reality was negotiable if you had enough lawyers. He was compact, dark-haired, with the kind of face that expressed concern the way a thermostat expresses temperature, mechanically, in response to conditions, without any underlying feeling. "Mr. Kavanaugh, let's step away for a moment." He put his hand on Kavanaugh's arm, gently, the way you guide someone who is about to make a scene worse. Then he turned to Imani, produced a business card from his breast pocket with the practiced smoothness of a man who kept business cards ready for exactly these moments. "If you have any concerns about tonight, I'd encourage you to contact our office directly. We'll handle this appropriately and make sure everyone is taken care of." The card read, Tate Renfro, Esquire, General Counsel, Kavanaugh Corporation. The phone number had a 713 area code. The email was a corporate address. The card was the first move in a chess game that Renfro had played 100 times before. Get the victim's contact information into a channel you control, and the narrative follows. Imani took the card, not because she intended to use it, because her hands needed something to hold that wasn't her own face. "He struck me," she said, not loudly, not emotionally, just a fact, delivered into the air between them, a statement of record. "I understand you're upset. Let's make sure you're all right, and we can discuss everything through the proper channels." He struck a pregnant woman, in front of 200 witnesses. That is assault under Texas Penal Code Section 22.01, enhanced to a third-degree felony because I'm visibly pregnant. I don't need proper channels. I need a police report. Renfro's expression didn't change, but his eyes did. A fractional narrowing, a micro-adjustment that Imani recognized from years of reading faces in hospital rooms, where patients' families often said one thing with their mouths and something very different with their eyes. He had not expected her to cite statute numbers. He had expected tears or shouting, or the helpless confusion that powerful men rely on when they hurt less powerful people. What he had gotten instead was a woman who knew the legal name for what had just been done to her and could recite its criminal classification from memory. Or not from memory. From the Notes app on her phone, where she kept a file labeled Texas Statutes, Patient Advocacy, that she had started 3 years ago when a patient's husband threatened a nurse on the unit, and the hospital's response had been to transfer the nurse to a different floor rather than call the police. She had looked up the assault statute then, had not forgotten it, had hoped she would never need it for herself. Margot Lydon materialized. The event coordinator's face wore an expression of theatrical concern, eyebrows high, mouth pulled into a sympathetic frown, hands clasped in front of her body in the universal gesture of someone who is about to manage a situation rather than address it. "Let me walk you to the valet. We'll have your car brought around." "I am so sorry about this. So sorry. These events can get a little chaotic, and sometimes people bump into each other, and—" "Nobody bumped into me. Sterling Kavanaugh slapped me across the face. Stop characterizing an assault as an accident." Margot's sympathy curdled. The shift was subtle, a tightening around the jaw, a slight withdrawal of the clasped hands, but Imani saw it. She had been seeing it her entire life. The moment when a black woman's refusal to accept a false narrative gets reclassified from assertiveness to aggression. The moment when the story changes from "she was assaulted" to "she's making a scene." "I think it's best if we discuss this privately," Margot said, "for everyone's comfort." "Everyone's comfort is not my priority right now." Imani walked out, through the service corridor, past the catering staff who pretended not to see her, past the security guard who stepped aside without meeting her eyes, into the elevator, down to the parking garage, into her car, where she sat behind the wheel with the engine running and her hands shaking and the baby kicking against her ribs like a small fist demanding attention. She called 911. Harris County 911. What is the nature of your emergency? I need to report an assault. I was struck by a man at a public event. I'm 7 months pregnant. I've left the venue. I'm in my car in the parking garage at the Houston Grand Hotel. Are you safe right now, ma'am? Yes. Do you need medical attention? I'm going to the ER after this call. I want a police report filed first. I'm dispatching an officer to your location. Can you describe the person who assaulted you? White male, approximately mid-50s, 6 feet tall, gray suit. His name is Sterling Kavanaugh. He is inside the ballroom on the second floor. The dispatcher paused, the kind of pause that happens when a name registers, when the person on the other end of the line realizes that the complaint involves someone whose name is on buildings, whose donations fund police athletic leagues, whose lawyers are the kind that make departments nervous. An officer is en route, ma'am. Please stay in your vehicle. The officer arrived 19 minutes later, took her statement in the parking garage, wrote it in a notebook without looking at her face, which was starting to swell, gave her a case number, told her a detective would follow up within 72 hours, did not go upstairs to speak with Kavanaugh, did not secure the venue's security footage, did not interview any witnesses. Imani drove to St. Luke's, got the ER evaluation, got the medical record that would become the foundation of everything that followed, drove home, found Junho at the kitchen table with cold tea and a face that told her he already knew. And from that night forward, things began to move, slowly at first, then with the accelerating inevitability of a machine that has been waiting for someone to press the start button. The police report went nowhere for 6 days. Detective Noel Sato, the HPD officer assigned to the case, called Imani on October 17th to inform her that the investigation is proceeding, but that we're still working to obtain the venue's security footage. When Imani asked what specific steps had been taken, Sato paused. I've been advised to coordinate with the venue's legal counsel before making any formal requests for footage. Advised by whom? Another pause. My supervising officer. Who is your supervising officer? Captain Bryce Underhill. He oversees high-profile cases in the district. Imani noted the correction. The thing Sato had almost said. Cases involving someone specific, someone important, someone whose name changed the rules, and the thing she had replaced it with. She wrote it down. Date, time, direct quote, the pause, the correction. I'd like to come in and give a formal statement, on the record, with the recording equipment running. Yes, that can be arranged. Let me check the captain's availability. I don't need the captain. I need a detective and a recording device. When is your next available appointment? The appointment was scheduled for October 20th, 3 days away. 3 days that should have been spent securing evidence, interviewing witnesses, and building a case. 3 days that were instead spent waiting for Captain Bryce Underhill to decide how to handle a complaint against a man who had given the Houston Police Officers Union $50,000 the previous year. On October 15th, 4 days after the gala, Margot Leiden's name appeared in Imani's inbox. Not a personal email. A press inquiry forwarded by Houston Memorial's Communications Department with a note that said, FYI, reporter from Houston Style asked about this. We declined comment. You should too. The forwarded email was from a lifestyle blogger who covered Houston's social scene. The subject line read, Guest incident at Kavanaugh Gala. Any comment? The body of the email referenced an altercation involving an intoxicated guest at the Foundation's annual event and asked whether Houston Memorial had any statement regarding the behavior of its representative. Intoxicated guest. The word sat in Imani's chest like swallowed glass. She had been drinking water. She was 7 months pregnant. She had not consumed alcohol in 30 weeks. Not a sip, not a taste, not a celebratory toast. And now, 4 days after being slapped by a billionaire, the story being circulated was that she had been drunk. She forwarded the email to her notebook file, screenshotted it, backed it up to her cloud drive. Then she called Sandra, her unit manager. "Did Margot Leiden contact the hospital about me?" Sandra's silence was its own answer. "Sandra. She called on October 13th, asked whether we'd reviewed your fitness for public representation. I told her your patient outcomes speak for themselves and that the Foundation's internal drama is not our concern." "Did she suggest I had been drinking?" "She implied it. I corrected her." "In writing?" Sandra paused. "No. It was a phone call." Imani closed her eyes. Phone calls leave no evidence. That was the point. The machinery of reputation destruction operated through phone calls, whispered suggestions, implications that could be denied if challenged, because they existed only in the air between two people's mouths. "Sandra, I need you to email me a summary of that call. Date, time, what was said. I need it in writing." "Imani, I don't want to get pulled into—" "You're already pulled in. They called your office, about your employee, during work hours. That's a personnel matter now, and it needs documentation." Sandra sent the email that afternoon. 3 paragraphs, carefully worded, covering the content of Margot's call without editorializing. Imani printed it, signed the printout with the date, and added it to the file. The file was growing, and the people who were trying to make this go away did not know it existed. On October 18th, 1 week after the gala, Jolene Marsh filed the first complaint. It appeared in Imani's personnel record as an anonymous concern submitted through Houston Memorial's patient safety reporting system. The system was designed to allow staff to report safety issues without fear of retaliation, a noble intention that also created a perfect tool for anyone who wanted to file a false complaint without attaching their name to it. The complaint alleged that on October 16th, Imani had demonstrated emotional instability during a patient interaction and had raised her voice in a manner that caused distress to a laboring patient and her family. Vanishes. The complaint recommended a fitness for duty evaluation given recent personal stressors that may be affecting clinical judgment. Imani had not worked on October 16th. She had been at home, on a scheduled day off, icing her face and waiting for Detective Sato's phone call. The shift log confirmed this. The time clock confirmed this. The fact that she had not been in the building on the date of the alleged incident was provable with 4 keystrokes on any hospital computer. But the complaint was in the system now, and in hospital bureaucracy, the existence of a complaint matters more than its validity. The existence creates a file. The file creates a process. The process creates meetings, reviews, evaluations, a grinding, time-consuming machinery of institutional response that treats the accused and the accuser with equal seriousness, regardless of whether the accusation has any relationship to reality. The second complaint appeared 2 days later. Different date, October 17th, a day Imani had worked. Different allegation. Failure to follow medication administration protocol resulting in a near-miss event. Specific enough to sound credible, vague enough to resist easy disproof. Imani pulled the medication administration record for every patient she had cared for on October 17th, cross-referenced each medication, each dose, each timestamp against the physician orders, the pharmacy verification log, and the electronic health records audit trail. Everything matched. Every dose correct. Every timestamp accurate. Every co-signature present. The complaint was fabricated. But proving fabrication required the kind of evidence gathering that took days, and in the meantime, the complaint sat in the system, radiating institutional concern like a low-grade fever that nobody could identify the source of. The third complaint arrived on October 21st. This one was different. Not anonymous, signed by Jolene Marsh herself, submitted not through the patient safety system, but directly to the unit manager as a peer concern. It alleged that Imani had been increasingly withdrawn and irritable over the previous 2 weeks, and recommended that, given the combination of advanced pregnancy and recent personal difficulties, a temporary reassignment to administrative duties might be appropriate for patient and staff safety. 3 complaints in 6 days, all targeting the same nurse, all arriving in the wake of an assault that the hospital was pretending hadn't happened. Imani sat in the break room with the 3 complaints printed in front of her, arranged chronologically, and did something that made the union representative who walked in 10 minutes later stop in the doorway and stare. She had built a matrix, 3 columns, date of alleged incident, shift log for that date, supporting documentation, color-coded, cross-referenced, with footnotes citing the specific hospital policies that each complaint allegedly violated and the specific evidence that demonstrated no violation had occurred. The matrix included a timeline showing that all 3 complaints were filed within a 6-day window immediately following the gala incident, that 2 of the 3 referenced dates when Imani was not on duty, and that the 3rd was contradicted by the complete medication administration record. The union representative, a heavyset man named Terrence, who had been doing this job long enough to recognize retaliation when he saw it, looked at the matrix, then at Imani, then back at the matrix. "You've done this before," he said. "I'm a nurse. Charting is what we do." "This isn't charting. I don't know what this is, but it's not charting." He was right. It wasn't charting. It was the systematic deconstruction of a coordinated attack, organized with a precision that exceeded clinical documentation and entered territory that Terrence couldn't quite identify but recognized as professional. Not nursing professional. Something else. Something that involved building cases, following evidence chains, and constructing the kind of paper trail that survives institutional pressure. Imani did not explain, just handed him the folder. "I want a formal grievance filed against whoever submitted the anonymous complaints. I also want Jolene Marsh's signed complaint investigated for retaliatory intent under the hospital's anti-retaliation policy. Section 6.4 of the Employee Handbook, which prohibits adverse actions against employees who have filed external legal complaints." Terrence took the folder, looked at her with an expression that was equal parts respect and unease. "You know this is going to get ugly." "It's already ugly. I'm just making sure it's documented." He left. Imani sat in the break room alone, ate her granola bar, drank her water, put her hand on her belly, and felt the baby move. Slow, rolling movements, like a swimmer turning underwater. She thought about the gala, about the slap, about the sound it made, about the 200 people who watched it happen, and the 0 people who intervened. She thought about Junho, about the phone call in the garage, about the locked leather bag, about the things she had chosen not to ask because the answers might require her to make decisions she was not ready to make. And she thought about the things she could control, the complaints, the documentation, the evidence, the slow, unglamorous, exhausting work of proving what happened when the people with power wanted to pretend it hadn't. She went back to work. Room 414 needed vitals. Room 418 needed a lactation consult. Room 420 had a new admission, a woman in early labor, scared, alone, clutching a pillow from home because it smelled like her mother. Imani held her hand, checked her cervix, started the IV, documented everything. On October 20th, she went to HPD headquarters for her formal statement. Detective Sato met her in the lobby, a Japanese-American woman in her late 30s, compact, serious, with the kind of face that didn't waste expressions on things that didn't merit them. She led Imani to an interview room on the 3rd floor. Small, clean, fluorescent lit. A table, 2 chairs, a recording device, and a camera mounted in the corner with a red light that Imani checked twice to confirm was active. "For the record, can you state your name and date of birth?" Imani stated them. Then she gave her account, start to finish, with timestamps, with names, with the kind of sequential precision that made Sato look up from her notepad twice with an expression that was difficult to read. "And after he struck you, did anyone at the event intervene?" "No." "Did security respond?" "The event coordinator attempted to characterize the assault as an accident and offered to walk me to the valet. Security did not engage." Did anyone offer to call the police? No, I called 911 myself from the parking garage, Sato wrote. Her pen moved steadily, without pauses for thought, which told Imani that the detective was either very experienced or very careful, or both. Ms. Okafor, I want to be transparent with you. This case has been reviewed by my supervising officer, Captain Bryce Underhill. He has expressed concern about the public profile of the accused and has recommended that we proceed carefully to avoid what he described as unnecessary media exposure. Unnecessary for whom? Sato did not answer. Her pen stopped writing. She looked at Imani with an expression that communicated, as clearly as language could, that she understood the question, agreed with its implications, and could not say so on the record. Has Captain Underhill had any contact with the accused or his legal representatives? I'm not able to comment on internal communications. Is there a reason the venue's security footage has not been subpoenaed? The venue's legal counsel has indicated that the relevant footage was lost due to a technical malfunction. A technical malfunction that affected only the cameras covering Table 14 during the 8 minutes surrounding the incident? Sato's pen remained still. Ms. Okafor, I want you to know that I take this complaint seriously. I am investigating it thoroughly. I will follow the evidence wherever it leads. The sentence was sincere. Imani could hear that. But she could also hear the constraints underneath it. The institutional boundaries that separated what Sato wanted to do from what Sato was allowed to do. The invisible pressure being applied from above by a captain who had decided that this case was more about managing a relationship with a powerful man than about investigating a crime committed by one. I appreciate that, Detective. I've brought copies of all documentation I have, my ER records, the 911 call transcript, and a list of potential witnesses I identified at the event. I've also brought evidence of retaliatory actions taken against me at my workplace in the week following the incident. She handed Sato a folder. Inside, the ER report, the 911 transcript, the 3 workplace complaints with her matrix analysis, the forwarded email from Margot Leiden's press inquiry, and Sandra's written summary of Margot's phone call to the hospital. Sato opened the folder. Her eyebrows rose. Not dramatically, just enough to indicate that she had expected a complaint and received an investigation. You've been thorough. Thoroughness is the only weapon I have right now. The statement sat between them. Sato nodded, closed the folder, ended the recording. I'll be in touch, Ms. Okafor. Please don't hesitate to call if anything changes or if you feel unsafe. Imani drove home, parked in the garage, sat in the car for 3 minutes, holding her belly, feeling the baby move, waiting for her heart rate to slow. Then she went inside, where Jun-ho was sitting at the table again, with his phone face down and his tea gone cold, and told him everything. He listened, asked questions. The same questions he always asked. Precise, sequential, structured. Who was in the room? What was the camera's position? Did anyone see her hand over the folder? Why does it matter if anyone saw me give her the folder? Because information is leverage, and leverage only works if the people it's being used against don't know it exists. The sentence was strange. Not wrong, just strange. It belonged to a vocabulary that logistics managers didn't typically use. Leverage, information, the strategic value of secrecy. These were words from a different world than the one Jun-ho was supposed to inhabit. Imani let it pass. She was tired. The baby was pressing on her bladder. The bruise on her face had faded from purple to yellow-green, but she could still feel it. Not the pain, which was gone, but the memory of impact, which lived in her skin like an echo. 2 days later, October 22nd, the guest's phone recording surfaced on social media. It appeared on Instagram first, posted by a woman named Kendall Ogden, the guest who had been filming the floral centerpiece. She hadn't posted it immediately. Hadn't wanted the attention, the scrutiny, the inevitable backlash that comes from publicly accusing a billionaire of assault. But she had shown the video to her sister, who had shown it to her husband, who worked in local news, and the husband had said, "This is going to come out eventually. Better it comes out from you than from someone who edits it first. The video was 31 seconds long, shaky, partially obscured by a water pitcher. The audio was muffled by background music and conversation, but three things were unmistakable. Kavanaugh's voice saying, "Are you serious right now?" The sound of the slap, and Imani's hand going to her belly. That involuntary, universal gesture that no viewer could misinterpret. Within 12 hours, the video had 400,000 views. Within 48 hours, it had 2.3 million. Local news picked it up first. Then national outlets. Then the algorithmic machinery of outrage. The comments, the shares, the opinion pieces, the takes and countertakes that turn a 31-second video into a 24-hour news cycle. HPD could no longer ignore the case. Captain Bryce Underhill, the man who had been carefully managing the complaint into oblivion, was forced to hold a press briefing. He stood behind a podium with the HPD seal behind him, flanked by a public affairs officer who kept checking her phone. His statement was 7 sentences long. The Houston Police Department is aware of video circulating on social media depicting an incident at a private event on October 11th. We take all reports of assault seriously. A formal complaint was filed on the night of the incident, and an investigation has been underway since that time. We have made contact with the accused and his legal representatives. No charges have been filed at this time. The investigation is ongoing. We will provide updates as appropriate. 7 sentences. 4 of them were bureaucratic filler. 1 was a lie. The investigation had not been underway in any meaningful sense. And 2 were warnings. No charges have been filed, told Kavanaugh's team that they still had time, and we will provide updates as appropriate, told the public that HPD would control the pace and the narrative. Imani watched the briefing on her phone, sitting in the hospital break room, eating a granola bar, her belly pressing against the edge of the table. She noted the language, the passive voice, the absence of Kavanaugh's name, the careful construction of a statement designed to sound responsive while committing to nothing. Then her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Okafor, this is Una Bayek. I'm an attorney with Bayek and Wren LLP. Your case has been referred to me through a legal aid network. I'd like to meet with you at your earliest convenience to discuss your options. No charge for the consultation." Imani stared at the text. She had not contacted any legal aid network, had not requested attorney referrals, had not given her phone number to anyone outside of HPD and her union representative. She typed, "How did you get my number?" The response came in 30 seconds. "Through the referral network. I'm happy to explain the intake process when we meet. Would tomorrow work? I can come to you." Imani looked at the text for a long time. Then she typed, "Tomorrow at 10 a.m., my house." She did not tell Junho about the text. For the first time in 3 years of marriage, she kept something from him. Not out of deception, but out of a need to understand, on her own terms, what was happening around her before it was shaped by his hands. That night, she couldn't sleep. Lay on her side with a pillow between her knees and her hand on her belly and her eyes on the ceiling, thinking about the things she knew and the things she didn't. She knew she had been assaulted. She knew the system was protecting her assailant. She knew her workplace was being weaponized against her. These were facts, documented, time-stamped, provable. But she also knew, in the way you know things that you have not yet allowed yourself to think clearly, that her husband was not who he appeared to be. That the locked leather bag, and the second phone, and the midnight phone calls in Korean, and the visitors who came and went without introduction were not the habits of a logistics manager who moved containers through the port of Houston. And she knew, or was beginning to know, that the attorney who had texted her out of nowhere, offering free legal help for a case that only 3 people outside of HPD were aware of, had not found her through a legal aid network. She had been found by someone who was already watching. Someone who had been watching before the gala, before the slap, before any of this began. The question was whether that someone was Junho, and whether the protection he was offering was something she could accept without becoming complicit in whatever it was he actually did. She lay in the dark, listened to him breathe, felt the baby kick. Some questions, she decided, could wait until morning. But morning brought Yuna Beck, and Yuna Beck brought answers, and the answers brought questions that were worse. She arrived at exactly 10 a.m. in a black Lexus sedan that had been detailed so recently the paint still smelled like wax. She was Korean-American, late 30s, slight, with sharp cheekbones and the kind of posture that came from either ballet training or courtroom experience. Her briefcase was leather, monogrammed Y.B. in gold, and her shoes were patent leather heels that cost more than Imani's monthly car payment. Pro bono attorneys did not drive Lexuses, did not carry monogrammed briefcases, did not wear shoes that announced with every step that their owner operated in a financial stratum where legal aid referrals were a concept rather than a necessity. Imani noticed all of this, filed it, did not comment. "Thank you for seeing me, Ms. Okafor." Yuna's handshake was firm, brief, professional. "I've reviewed the publicly available information about your case, the video, the police briefing, the media coverage. I believe you have a strong civil claim, and that the criminal case, if properly pursued, could result in felony charges." If properly pursued. You said if. Yuna sat down at the kitchen table, opened her briefcase, produced a legal pad, a pen, and a folder that was already an inch thick. "I did. Based on what I've seen so far, the investigation is being managed rather than conducted. The venue footage conveniently malfunctioned. The responding officer didn't interview witnesses or secure the scene. The detective assigned to your case is competent, but constrained by a supervising officer who appears to have a relationship with the accused." "How do you know all of this? I haven't shared any of it publicly." Yuna looked at her. The look was steady, direct, and carried the particular quality of someone who has been asked a question they were prepared for. "I have resources, research staff, people who are very good at finding publicly available information and connecting patterns. Your 911 call is a public record. The officer's report is obtainable through open records requests. Captain Underhill's relationship with the Kavanaugh Foundation is documented in the Foundation's annual donor reports, which are filed with the Texas Secretary of State." It was a good answer, thorough, plausible. Every piece of information she cited was technically accessible to a determined attorney with a research staff. But the speed, the fact that she had compiled this in less than 11 days, had connected dots that required knowing which dots existed, had arrived at Imani's door with a case file that looked like 3 weeks of work compressed into one, suggested resources that went beyond a legal aid referral network. Imani let it go, for now. "What are my options?" Yuna outlined them with the clinical precision of an attorney who had done this many times. Criminal track, push HPD to file charges under Texas Penal Code Section 22.01, subsection B, paragraph 3, assault causing bodily injury to a pregnant person, a third-degree felony carrying 2 to 10 years. Civil track, file suit for assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and exemplary damages under Texas Civil Practice and Remedies Code. Section 41.003. Administrative track, file complaints against Captain Underhill for mishandling the investigation and against the venue for destruction of evidence. I recommend pursuing all 3 simultaneously. The criminal case puts pressure on the civil case. The civil case opens discovery, which produces evidence. The administrative complaints create institutional accountability. Each track reinforces the others. And how much does all of this cost? My firm is handling this pro bono. No fees, no percentage, no obligation. Why? The question was blunt. Imani did not soften it. Yuna set her pen down. Because cases like yours are why I became a lawyer. A powerful man assaulted a pregnant woman in front of 200 witnesses, and the system designed to protect her is protecting him instead. If I can't take that case for free, What am I doing with my degree? It was a good answer, maybe even a true one, but it wasn't the whole answer, and both of them knew it. Junho came home at noon, after Yuna had left. He set his keys on the counter, always in the same spot, always with the teeth pointing left, and looked at Imani with a question in his eyes that he didn't ask. I had a meeting with a lawyer this morning, she said. Yuna Bek. He said the name without surprise, without curiosity. The way you say the name of someone you already know. How did you know? She's the best civil rights attorney in Houston. If you needed a lawyer, I would have recommended her. She said she came through a legal aid referral. Junho opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water, drank it standing up, his back to her, his shoulders carrying the particular tension of a man who is deciding how much truth to offer. Legal aid networks are complicated. Referrals come from many places. Junho. He turned. His face was composed, not blank, not defensive, just arranged in the careful neutrality of someone who has spent years controlling what his face reveals. She's good, Imani. She'll fight for you. That's what matters right now. What matters right now is whether my husband hired a lawyer for me without telling me and pretended it was charity. He set the water bottle down, crossed the kitchen, took both her hands in his, the way he always did when conversations became heavy enough to require an anchor. I made a phone call to someone I know, who knows Yuna, who mentioned your case. That's all. That's all. Yes. And the someone you know, who are they? Someone I trust. It was not an answer. It was a door being held shut with both hands, and Imani could feel the weight of whatever was on the other side pressing against the frame. She could push, could demand names, connections, the architecture of the network that had produced a pro bono attorney with a monogrammed briefcase and a Lexus sedan within 11 days of an assault that HPD was trying to bury. But the baby kicked, and her face still ached where the bruise had been, and she was tired, not the physical tiredness of pregnancy, but the deeper exhaustion of being a person who had been assaulted and disbelieved and retaliated against, and was now standing in her own kitchen, wondering whether the man she loved was protecting her, or controlling her, or both. Okay, she said. He squeezed her hands, released them, went to the stove to start dinner. Rice and galbi and spinach namul. Comfort food, the kind you make when you want the house to feel safe, even when safety is an illusion. She sat at the table and watched him cook and thought about the locked leather bag and the second phone and the photographs of Sterling Kavanaugh that she had not been meant to see. The next 2 weeks were a war fought on 4 fronts, and Imani was losing on 3 of them. At the hospital, the complaints continued. HR convened a wellness review panel. Not a disciplinary hearing, they were careful to explain, just a check-in, just a conversation, just a chance to make sure that Imani was coping well with the stressors in her life. The panel consisted of 3 administrators, none of whom worked on the labor and delivery unit, none of whom had ever met Imani before, and none of whom seemed interested in the fact that 2 of the 3 complaints referenced dates when she hadn't been in the building. Her shifts were reduced, not suspended. That would require formal cause and trigger union protections. Just modified for maternal wellness, a phrase that sounded caring and functioned as punishment. 3 12-hour shifts per week became 2. Lost income, $640 per pay period. For a pregnant woman with a mortgage and a baby coming in 10 weeks, $640 was not an abstraction. It was diapers. It was the electric bill. It was the copay for the next OB visit. Jolene Marsh moved through the unit with the serene confidence of someone who knows her sabotage is working. She was pleasant to Imani, aggressively, performatively pleasant, the kind of pleasantness that is indistinguishable from aggression to anyone who is paying attention and invisible to anyone who isn't. "How are you feeling, Imani? You look tired. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. If you need to sit down during your shift, just let me know. We all understand." "I heard about the video. That must be so stressful. I'm here if you need to talk." Each sentence was a small blade, precisely positioned. Concern as condescension, sympathy as surveillance, support as a reminder that Imani's situation was known, observed, and being used. On October 29th, 18 days after the gala, Imani discovered the paper trail. It was an accident, or rather it was the result of the kind of methodical evidence gathering that looks like an accident, but is actually the product of a mind trained to follow patterns until they reveal their source. She had been reviewing her personnel file, a right guaranteed under hospital policy, and had noticed that the 3 anonymous complaints, while submitted through the patient safety system under different user IDs, had all been entered from the same workstation, terminal number NUR-4-017, the workstation in the charge nurse's office, Jolene Marsh's office. The workstation log wouldn't tell her who was typing. The patient safety system anonymized the submitter, but it told her where. And the where was damning, because only 3 people had badge access to that office: Jolene Marsh, the assistant charge nurse, and the unit manager. The assistant charge nurse had been on vacation during the relevant dates. Sandra, the unit manager, had already demonstrated she was not involved, which left 1 person. Imani printed the workstation log, added it to the file. Then she did something she had been considering for 11 days. She filed a formal complaint with the Texas Board of Nursing, citing Texas Occupations Code Section 301.452, subsection B, paragraph 10, which defines unprofessional conduct to include falsifying records affecting patient care. The complaint named no individual. It requested an investigation into the filing of false patient safety reports from a specific workstation on the labor and delivery unit at Houston Memorial Hospital. It was a grenade thrown through proper channels, and it would take months to detonate. But it was in the system now, documented, time-stamped, irreversible. On the legal front, Tate Renfro, Kavanaugh Corp's general counsel, escalated. A letter arrived at Imani's home on October 25th, sent via certified mail, on letterhead that probably cost more per sheet than most people's stationery budgets. It was 5 pages long, single-spaced, and its core message could be reduced to 3 sentences. Stop talking about what happened at the gala. If you don't stop, we will sue you for defamation. And by the way, your nursing license might be at risk if you continue to make unsubstantiated allegations against a respected community leader. The letter cited no specific defamatory statements, because Imani had not made any public statements. She had not spoken to the media, had not posted on social media, had not even discussed the incident with anyone outside her union representative, her attorney, and the police. The cease and desist was not a response to anything she had done. It was a preemptive strike designed to silence her before she started talking and to create a legal pretext for further action if she refused. Imani showed the letter to Una Beck. Una read it in 90 seconds. Set it down. Looked at Imani with an expression that was closer to anticipation than concern. This is a SLAPP, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. Texas has one of the strongest anti-SLAPP statutes in the country. Civil Practice and Remedies Code. Chapter 27. If they file suit based on this letter, we can move to dismiss under the anti-SLAPP provision and recover attorney's fees. They're threatening my nursing license. That's a separate issue, and it's potentially a violation of the Texas Disciplinary Rules of Professional Conduct. Rule 4.04 prohibits an attorney from threatening criminal prosecution or administrative action solely to gain an advantage in a civil matter. I'm filing a complaint with the state bar. Will that actually do anything? State bar complaints take 18 months to 2 years, but the complaint itself creates a record, and the record creates risk. Renfro knows this. He's counting on you not knowing it. Yuna drafted a response, 9 pages, surgical, citing case law and statute numbers with the density of someone who had written this kind of letter before and enjoyed it. The response did not threaten, did not bluster. It simply, comprehensively, identified every legal error in Renfro's letter, cited the penalties for each, and concluded with a single sentence. My client reserves all rights and remedies available under law, including but not limited to those provided by Texas Penal Code Section 22.01 and the Texas Civil Rights Act. Renfro did not respond. But the letters stopped. On November 1st, 3 weeks after the gala, Imani's car was vandalized. She found it at 6:45 a.m., walking to the hospital parking garage for her reduced shift. The driver's side door had been keyed, deep, deliberate scratches that spelled a word in capital letters. Liar. The windshield had a crack running diagonally from the lower left to the upper right, consistent with a deliberate impact, a rock or a hammer, rather than a road hazard. No security cameras covered that section of the garage. Imani had parked there every shift for 6 years without incident. The section's blind spot was well known to hospital staff, known to anyone who had worked the unit long enough to learn which areas were monitored and which weren't, known to Jolene Marsh, who had worked the unit for 15 years. Imani photographed the damage, called the police, filed a report, called her insurance company, took an Uber to work, did not cry, did not raise her voice, did not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. If you think this woman is going to let them win, you seriously underestimate what she's capable of. Stay with this story. The truth is about to come out. That evening, the second incident. She was leaving the grocery store, H-E-B on West Alabama, the one she went to every Tuesday because the produce was fresh and the parking lot was well lit, when she noticed a car following her. Silver sedan, tinted windows, no front plates. It pulled out of the H-E-B lot 30 seconds after she did and matched every turn she made for 6 blocks. Imani did not drive home. She drove to a gas station on Montrose Boulevard, well lit, security cameras visible, open 24 hours, and parked under the brightest light she could find. The silver sedan pulled into the lot, parked 3 spaces away, engine running. No one got out. She sat in her car with her phone in her hand, the 911 screen open, her thumb hovering over the call button. Waited. Watched the sedan in her rearview mirror. Counted seconds. Made a decision. She called Junho. There's a silver car following me. No plates. Tinted windows. I'm at the Shell station on Montrose. He's parked 3 spaces to my left. Junho's voice did not change, did not rise, did not carry the panic or the anger that a normal husband's voice might carry when his pregnant wife calls to say she is being followed. Stay where you are. Keep your doors locked. I'm sending someone. Sending who? Someone who handles these things. Junho, who are you sending? Imani, stay in the car. 5 minutes. He hung up. She sat in the gas station lot with her heart hammering and her baby kicking and the silver sedan's engine idling 3 spaces away. 5 minutes passed. 7. 9. At the 11-minute mark, a black SUV pulled into the lot. No markings. No identifiable features except the quiet confidence with which it positioned itself between Imani's car and the silver sedan. Not blocking, just present, the automotive equivalent of a bodyguard stepping into a sightline. The silver sedan's engine revved, reversed, pulled out of the lot, turned south on Montrose and disappeared. The black SUV's window lowered 2 inches. A voice, male, accented, speaking English with the careful pronunciation of someone for whom it is a second language, said, "Ms. Okafor, you can go home now. We will follow to make sure." She drove home. The SUV followed, parked across the street when she pulled into her driveway. Its engine shut off. Its lights went dark. Junho was at the kitchen table when she walked in. He stood up, crossed the room, put his arms around her, gently, carefully, the way you hold someone who is carrying something precious and fragile, which she was twice over. "It won't happen again," he said into her hair. "How do you know?" Because I know. She pulled back, looked at his face, searched for the man she had married, the one who made doenjang jigai on Saturday mornings and arranged their shoes by the door and spoke to their unborn child in Korean with a softness that made his voice almost unrecognizable. He was still there. Under the control and the precision and the phone calls and the locked leather bag, he was still there. But he was not all that was there. The car across the street, she said. The SUV. Whose is it? It's yours. For now. Until this is resolved. That's not what I asked. I know. They looked at each other across the kitchen. The same kitchen where he had made her tea on the night of the gala, where he had asked his precise questions, where he had said, "I'll handle the rest," with the certainty of a man who had handled things before and knew exactly what handling required. Imani made a decision. Not the decision she would have liked to make. Not the clean, simple choice between knowing and not knowing, between confronting and accepting. A Messier decision, a human one. The decision to accept protection from a source she did not fully understand, because the alternative was to refuse it and face whatever was coming alone and pregnant and targeted by a billionaire who had already demonstrated his willingness to put his hands on her. She would get her answers. Later, when the baby was safe, when the case was filed, when the world she was building out of documentation and evidence and law was strong enough to stand without the shadow architecture that her husband was constructing alongside it. "Okay," she said. Junho nodded, went to the stove, started cooking. The next morning, the doorbell camera she had installed 3 days earlier was gone. Removed cleanly. No broken wires, no damaged mounting bracket, just a blank space where the camera had been and 2 small holes in the wall where the screws had held it. By noon, a new camera was installed. Commercial grade. Hardwired, not wireless. Installed by a man in a navy polo shirt who did not introduce himself, did not make small talk, and left a business card on the kitchen counter that had no name on it. Just a phone number and the words, "Technical Services." Imani looked at the card, looked at the camera, looked at the black SUV still parked across the street. Then she went to work. Because she was a nurse, and her patients needed her. And the world did not stop spinning just because hers was coming apart. November 3rd brought the breakthrough that changed the trajectory of everything. Yuna Bayek called at 7:15 a.m., early for an attorney, which meant it was important. The hospital's HR director just sent me something interesting. In response to our discovery request related to the workplace retaliation claim, they produced Jolene Marsh's personnel file. Normally, there wouldn't be much there, but someone in HR made a mistake, or did us a favor. They included a disclosure form that Marsh filed 2 years ago. What kind of disclosure? A conflict of interest disclosure, required under the hospital's ethics policy for employees who serve on external boards. Marsh disclosed her position on the Kavanaugh Foundation's Community Advisory Board, but the disclosure also lists, as required, any financial relationships with the entity. Marsh received 2 payments from the Kavanaugh Foundation in the past 18 months, $7,500 each, classified as consulting fees. Imani sat down. Consulting on what? That's exactly the right question. The disclosure form doesn't specify, but $15,000 from the Kavanaugh Foundation to a senior nurse at the hospital where the foundation's nominee was assaulted, and who then filed 3 false complaints against that nominee, is a pattern that any employment attorney would find very interesting. And any prosecutor? Potentially. If the payments can be connected to the complaints, if there's evidence that Marsh was compensated for retaliating against you, that's conspiracy. But we're not there yet. Right now, all we have is proximity. Payments and complaints in the same time frame involving the same parties. It's suggestive, not conclusive. What do we do with it? We add it to the civil filing. We're going to sue Kavanaugh, Renfro, Marsh, and the Foundation. And in the complaint, we're going to tell a story about a man who assaulted a pregnant woman and then deployed his legal team, his foundation, and his money to silence her. The payments to Marsh are a chapter in that story. And once we file, the discovery process will write the rest. Imani hung up, sat at the kitchen table, looked at the folder that had been growing since October 11th, the documentation, the screenshots, the timelines, the evidence of a coordinated campaign to silence a woman whose only crime was being in the wrong place when a powerful man lost his temper. The folder was thick now, heavy, real, and it was about to get heavier. Because somewhere in a federal building in downtown Houston, a complaint had been filed, not by Imani, not by Una, not by anyone whose name she would recognize, alleging that Kavanaugh Corporation had submitted falsified minority contractor certifications on 3 federally funded housing projects. The complaint cited specific contract numbers, specific shell companies, specific documents that proved the certifications were fraudulent. The complaint was filed under the False Claims Act, 31 U.S.C. Section 3729, which allowed private citizens to bring suit on behalf of the government against entities that had defrauded federal programs. The complainant's identity was sealed, the investigation was confidential, and the evidence attached to the complaint was so detailed, so precisely documented, so clearly the product of someone with access to Kavanaugh Corporation's internal files, that the federal investigators who received it looked at each other and asked the same question: where did this come from? The answer to that question lived in a locked leather bag in a hall closet in a townhouse in Midtown Houston, where a man who made doenjang jigai on Saturday mornings and arranged his shoes in a perfect line by the front door was reading a text message in Korean that said, "Filed, clock is running." Junho Park deleted the message, put the phone in the bag, locked the bag, checked the locks on every window in the house, in the same order he checked them every night: kitchen, living room, guest bath, bedroom, and went to bed beside his wife, who was sleeping on her side with a pillow between her knees and her hand on her belly, breathing the slow, deep breaths of someone who trusted the safety of the room she was in. He lay in the dark, listened to her breathe, felt the baby move through the mattress, a small, rhythmic tapping like a heartbeat's echo. He had done things to protect this family that she would not understand, would not approve of, would not forgive, perhaps, if she knew the full scope of what handling things required in the world he inhabited. But he had done them, would do them again, because the man who had struck his wife, who had put his hand on the face of a woman carrying his child, had made a miscalculation so profound that its consequences would take months to fully materialize. Sterling Kavanaugh thought he had slapped a nurse. He had slapped the wife of the man who controlled every shipping container that entered the port of Houston after dark. And the port, unlike the Grand Ballroom, did not have cameras that could conveniently malfunction. November 7th. 32 weeks pregnant. 27 days since the gala. The civil complaint was filed at 9:14 a.m. in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Texas, Houston Division. Una Bayek hand-delivered it to the clerk's office. 4 copies, 86 pages, plus Exhibits A through Q. The case caption read, Okafor versus Kavanaugh et al. The defendants named were Sterling Kavanaugh individually, Kavanaugh Corporation, the Kavanaugh Foundation, Tate Renfro individually and in his capacity as general counsel, and Jolene Marsh individually. The complaint alleged assault and battery under Texas common law, intentional infliction of emotional distress, civil conspiracy to obstruct justice and retaliate against a crime victim, and violations of 42 U.S.C. Section 1985, Paragraph 3, conspiracy to interfere with civil rights. The damages sought were listed only as in excess of the jurisdictional minimum, which in federal court meant $75,000, but in practice meant whatever a jury decided a billionaire should pay for slapping a pregnant woman and then spending a month trying to erase her from the record. Una called at 9:31. It's filed. They'll be served by end of day. Discovery requests go out simultaneously, all internal communications related to the gala, all financial records between the Foundation and Houston Memorial employees, every communication between Kavanaugh Corp. and HPD regarding your complaint. Imani asked how long before they responded. 21 days to answer. Discovery responses due in 30, but Renfro will file a motion to dismiss first, probably within the week. He'll argue failure to state a claim, try to strip the conspiracy count. It won't work, but it buys them calendar time. Imani hung up, sat on the edge of the bed with her phone in her lap and her hand on her belly. The baby was quiet this morning, sleeping maybe, or just still, conserving energy the way all living things do before something changes. She had not told Junho about the filing, not because she was hiding it. The complaint was a public record the moment it hit the clerk's desk, but because she wanted to see his reaction when he learned about it through his own channels, wanted to measure the gap between what he already knew and what he pretended to discover. He found out at noon. She knew this because his phone rang while he was slicing scallions for lunch, the black phone, the one without a case, and he answered it in Korean, listened for 30 seconds, said 2 words, and hung up. Then he set the phone on the counter and continued cutting as though nothing had interrupted the rhythm of his knife. "You filed today," he said. "Yes." "Good." He did not ask what the complaint contained. Did not ask about the legal strategy, the defendants, the discovery scope. Either he already knew, which meant he had access to information a logistics manager should not possess, or he trusted Unibeck with a completeness that raised the same question from a different angle. Imani watched him cook. The knife moved through the scallions with mechanical precision, identical cuts, identical spacing, the kind of consistency that came from repetition so deep it had become something beyond habit. She had always admired his hands, the steadiness of them, the way they could be gentle, cradling her face, resting on her belly to feel the baby kick, and then, in the next moment, demonstrate a control that was not gentleness but something harder, something trained into the tendons over years that he had never described and she had never asked about. She let the silence hold. Some truths, she was learning, arrived not through questions but through patience, through the accumulation of small observations that eventually formed a picture too clear to ignore. The picture was forming. She was not yet ready to look at it directly. November 9th. Renfro responded, not with the motion to dismiss Yuna had predicted, but with something worse. A process server appeared at Houston Memorial's main entrance at 2:15 p.m. and asked for Imani Okafor by name. Sandra intercepted him in the lobby before he could reach the unit floor. The document was a counterclaim, filed in Harris County District Court, state court, not federal, a deliberate jurisdictional split designed to force Imani to fight on 2 fronts simultaneously. The counterclaim alleged defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, and this was the part that made Yuna Baek's voice go flat and hard when she read it over the phone. Intentional infliction of emotional distress against Sterling Kavanaugh. The billionaire who had slapped a pregnant woman was now claiming that she had caused him emotional distress. Textbook slapsuit, Yuna said. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. Texas Civil Practice and Remedies Code. Chapter 27 gives us a fast-track mechanism to dismiss and recover our fees. I'll file the motion tomorrow. Imani closed her eyes. He's claiming I caused him emotional distress. He's arguing the video, which he didn't consent to be recorded, constitutes invasion of privacy, and that the resulting media coverage caused reputational harm. The theory is creative. It is also, legally speaking, baseless. Texas is a one-party consent state for recordings under Penal Code Section 16.02. The person filming was present at a public event. No additional consent was required. But the counterclaim was not designed to win. It was designed to cost. Every hour Yuna spent responding to it was an hour she couldn't invest in the federal case. Every document Imani had to produce in state court discovery was a document that drained her energy, her time, her rapidly diminishing reserves of endurance. The counterclaim was a weapon of attrition, the legal equivalent of a siege, built not to breach the walls, but to starve the people behind them. Renfro understood this, had built his entire career on the principle that justice was a resource, and like all resources, It could be monopolized by whoever had the money to buy the most of it. What Renfro did not understand, what he could not have known, was that the woman he was trying to exhaust had resources he hadn't accounted for. Resources that did not appear on any legal filing. Resources that moved through the port of Houston after dark in containers that no customs agent ever inspected twice. November 12th, the hospital escalated. Imani arrived for her reduced shift at 6:45 a.m. and found a letter in her physical employee mailbox, the small wooden cubby in the break room where paper communications collected dust. The letter was on hospital letterhead, signed by the chief nursing officer, Dr. Priya Chandrasekaran, whom Imani had met exactly once in 3 years. The letter informed her that effective immediately, she was being placed on administrative reassignment, pending the outcome of ongoing review of workplace concerns. Clinical duties suspended. She would report to the medical records department on the first floor for clerical tasks at her current hourly rate. They had taken her off the floor, taken her away from patients, removed her from the labor and delivery unit, where she had delivered 312 babies in 4 years, where her patient satisfaction scores were the highest on the unit, where she had held scared teenagers' hands through 12-hour labors and coached first-time mothers, and saved lives with a competence so quiet it was almost invisible, and placed her in a basement office, filing paper charts that no one would ever read. The letter cited no specific incident, no substantiated violation. It invoked the totality of concerns raised through multiple reporting channels, and assured her that the reassignment was non-punitive and temporary. Non-punitive. The word sat in her mouth like a copper coin. Sandra was already standing behind her desk with the door open when Imani walked in, waiting for her. Her face carried the expression of a woman who had fought a battle and lost, not for lack of effort, but for lack of rank. "I pushed back," Sandra said. "Went to Dr. Chandrasekaran directly. Showed her the shift logs, the medication records, the fact that 2 of 3 complaints referenced dates you weren't in the building. She listened. She acknowledged the evidence. And then she told me the decision had been made at the executive level and was not subject to unit-level review." "Executive level," Imani said. "The CEO's office." Sandra looked at her without flinching. "The people who decide whether the Kavanaugh Foundation's $3.2 million pledge to the new cardiac wing gets honored or withdrawn." There it was, the architecture of institutional cowardice, laid bare in a single sentence. The hospital was not punishing Imani because she had done anything wrong. The hospital was punishing her because a Billionaire's foundation had pledged $3.2 million, and that pledge was contingent, explicitly or through the unspoken language of power, on the hospital's willingness to make its troublesome nominee disappear from the places where she could be seen and heard and remembered. Imani took the letter, folded it carefully along the crease, put it in her bag, in the folder, alongside every other document that was building the case she hadn't known she would need to build when she accepted a nomination to a gala 6 weeks ago. Then she walked to the medical records department on the first floor, introduced herself to the supervisor, a tired man named Gerald who clearly had no idea why a labor and delivery nurse was suddenly appearing in his department, and sat down at a desk in the corner to begin the work of being invisible. She lasted 45 minutes before the first contraction hit. Not true labor, not at 32 weeks. A Braxton Hicks contraction, the uterus rehearsing for a performance still 8 weeks away. But it gripped her abdomen with enough force to make her gasp and press both palms flat on the desk. And Gerald, who had no training in obstetrics, panicked in the particular way that men who have never witnessed a woman's body in distress tend to panic. He called everyone. The nurse on duty called Imani's OB. The OB said, "Go home, drink water, rest." She drove home. Called Una from the car. "They reassigned me. Off the floor. Clerical duties. No patient contact. Effective this morning." Una was quiet for 3 seconds. Not silent. Thinking. Reorganizing. The way a chess player recalculates after an opponent makes a move that is either brilliant or catastrophic, and won't reveal which for several turns. This is retaliatory adverse action under Title VII and the Texas Labor Code Section 21.055. The timing alone, reassignment within 5 days of filing the federal complaint, creates a presumption of retaliation they'll have to rebut with evidence of legitimate, non-retaliatory reasons. They don't have any. We're amending the federal complaint to add the hospital as a defendant. Imani parked in her driveway. The car across the street was different today. A dark gray Hyundai Palisade instead of the usual black SUV, but the same watchful presence. A perimeter she had not requested and could not refuse. She went inside, drank water, lay on the couch with her feet elevated and her hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. Slow, undulating movements, a body swimming in warm dark, unaware of the world waiting outside. Junho came home at 5, earlier than usual. He set his keys on the counter, teeth pointing left as always, and sat on the couch beside her. Did not ask about her day. Did not need to. Something had already told him, through channels she could not trace, what the hospital had done. "You should eat," he said. "I'll make juk." Rice porridge. Comfort food for the sick, the tired, the people whose worlds have narrowed to the space between one crisis and the next. He made it in silence, standing at the stove with his back to her, his shoulders carrying a tension that she had learned to read the way she read fetal heart monitors. The cadence told the story even when the numbers looked normal. She ate. He sat across from her. The kitchen was quiet except for the spoon and the bowl and the distant idle of the Palisade's engine across the street. "The car changed," she said. "Rotation, 12-hour shifts." "For how long?" "As long as necessary." "Junho." She set the spoon down. "Who are these people?" He looked at her. The expression that crossed his face was one she had not seen before, or rather, had seen in fragments so brief she had filed them under other names. It was not anger, not fear. It was closer to resignation. The face of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and feels the moment approaching when he will have to set it down and show what the weight has done to him. "They're mine," he said. "People who work for me." "Work for you doing what?" "Protecting what matters to me." "That is not an answer." "It is the only one I can give you right now." He reached across the table, took her hands, the way he always did when conversations became heavy enough to require an anchor. "When this is over, when Kavanaugh is dealt with and the baby is here and safe, I will tell you everything. I will answer every question you have. The bag, the phones, the photographs, all of it. But not now. Not while you are 32 weeks pregnant and being targeted by a man who has already put his hands on you." His voice was steady. Not pleading. Junho did not plead. But underneath the steadiness there was something she recognized, because she heard it in her own voice every day at work. The controlled tone of someone managing a crisis who is asking for trust, not because they have earned it in this particular moment, but because the alternative is worse. She looked at him for a long time. At the man who made her breakfast every morning and checked the window locks every night, and had, somewhere in the machinery of his other life, deployed resources she could not name to build a perimeter around her that the Houston Police Department had failed to provide. "When this is over," she said, "you promise me." "I promise." She finished the porridge. He washed the bowl. They went to bed. She slept. He did not. At 2:17 a.m., the black phone vibrated on the nightstand. He read the message in the dark. A single line in Korean that, translated, said, "Federal investigators accessed Kavanaugh Corp servers. Internal audit commencing. 3 shell companies flagged. DOJ briefed." He deleted the message, put the phone in the nightstand drawer, closed his eyes. The False Claims Act investigation, the one filed under seal, the one alleging that Kavanaugh Corporation had submitted falsified minority contractor certifications on 3 federally funded housing projects, was accelerating. It was accelerating because someone had provided the federal investigators with server access credentials that should have been impossible to obtain without inside knowledge of Kavanaugh Corp's IT infrastructure. Junho Park was not inside Kavanaugh Corp., but the people who moved his containers through the Port of Houston included a network of logistics subcontractors, customs brokers, and freight forwarding companies whose operations intersected with Kavanaugh Corp's construction supply chain in ways that created visibility. The kind of visibility that, in the right hands, produced leverage. Sterling Kavanaugh had built his empire on federal contracts. Federal contracts required minority participation certifications. Certifications required documentation. Documentation could be fabricated, but fabrication left digital traces, and traces could be followed by people who knew where to look. Junho had known where to look for 6 months, had been looking since before the gala, before the slap, before any of this began, because Kavanaugh's construction projects imported materials through the Port of Houston, and the port was Junho's territory. In Junho's world, you knew everything about the people who moved goods through your territory, especially the ones who cut corners and paid bribes and assumed that wealth made them untouchable. The slap had not started this. The slap had simply given him a reason to accelerate a timeline that was already in motion. And now the timeline was ahead of schedule. November 15th, 33 weeks. Una filed the anti-slap motion against Kavanaugh's state court counterclaim. The same day, she filed the amended federal complaint adding Houston Memorial Hospital as a defendant under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Texas Labor Code Chapter 21, alleging retaliatory reassignment in response to protected activity. The amended complaint included 17 new exhibits. Among them, Exhibit R, the workstation log showing that all 3 anonymous complaints against Imani had been submitted from terminal NUR-4-017, the workstation in the charge nurse's office. Exhibit S, Jolene Marsh's conflict of interest disclosure, documenting $15,000 in consulting fees from the Kavanaugh Foundation. Exhibit T, a timeline correlating the payments, the complaints, and the hospital's escalating adverse actions, color-coded and annotated with the kind of analytical precision that made Una's paralegal ask, "Did the client make this herself?" She had, at the kitchen table. With a ruler and 3 colored pens and the systematic thoroughness that Terrence the union rep had recognized as something beyond charting, something professional, something trained, something that did not fit the story of a labor and delivery nurse who happened to be good at documentation. The media picked up the amended filing within hours. The gala video had kept the story alive for a month, but the new allegations, a hospital retaliating against an assault victim to protect a donor, a senior nurse being paid by the assailant's foundation to file false complaints, transformed the narrative from a simple assault case into something structural. Something that lived at the intersection of wealth and race and institutional power that made audiences lean forward not because they cared about one woman specifically, but because they recognized the pattern. Houston's local affiliates ran segments that evening. By morning, the story had reached the national wire services. An editorial in the Houston Chronicle used the phrase, "donor-driven retaliation," 3 times in 4 paragraphs. A state legislator from Harris County issued a statement calling for a full accounting of the Kavanaugh Foundation's relationships with public institutions. The statement was carefully worded. It did not take sides, did not name Imani, did not accuse anyone of anything specific. It was the political equivalent of standing near a fire without committing to putting it out or warming your hands. But it created pressure. And pressure, in institutional politics, creates movement. On November 18th, Houston Memorial's Board of Directors convened an emergency session. No media, no minutes released. But Sandra, who had been with the hospital long enough to know which walls were thin and which administrators talked when they shouldn't, told Imani the next day that the board had discussed exposure and liability and the foundation's pledge in the same sentence, and that the phrase whistleblower protection had been used by the hospital's outside counsel in a tone that suggested concern rather than compliance. On November 20th, Dr. Chandrasekaran sent Imani a new letter. This one was shorter. It informed her that her administrative reassignment had been reviewed in light of additional information and that she was being returned to clinical duties on the labor and delivery unit effective November 22nd. The letter did not apologize, did not acknowledge that the reassignment had been retaliatory, did not mention the Kavanaugh Foundation or the 3 false complaints or the $15,000 paid to a senior nurse who had weaponized the patient safety system to punish a colleague for being assaulted. The letter simply said she could come back to work, as if the past 10 days had been a scheduling error rather than a coordinated campaign to silence her. Imani read the letter twice, folded it, added it to the file. Then she went back to work, because she was a nurse, and room 416 needed vitals, and room 420 had a new admission. And the world did not stop turning just because the people running it had tried to push her off. November 26th, Thanksgiving. 46 days since the gala. Junho made a full Korean-American hybrid meal, turkey brined in soy sauce and sesame oil, japchae, mashed potatoes, kimchi, cranberry sauce, and doenjang. Jjigae because he made doenjang jjigae on every day that mattered and Thanksgiving mattered. They ate together at the kitchen table, just the two of them, with plates set precisely and chopsticks parallel, and the baby kicking hard enough to make the fabric of Imani's dress ripple visibly across her belly. After dinner, while Junho was washing dishes, a visitor came. The doorbell camera, the commercial-grade hardwired replacement that the man in the navy polo had installed, showed a woman on the porch, mid-50s, black, silver hair cut close, wearing a dark overcoat and low heels and carrying a leather portfolio that looked like it had been to more government buildings than most politicians. She did not fidget, did not check her phone, just stood on the porch with the quiet stillness of someone who was accustomed to waiting and knew that the door would open. Imani looked at the screen, looked at Junho. He was drying his hands on a towel, and his face carried an expression she would later describe as careful. Not surprised, not afraid, but careful, the way you hold a glass that might slip. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked. "Open the door, Imani." She opened the door. The woman extended her hand. "Ms. Okafor, I apologize for the intrusion, especially on a holiday. My name is Claudine Devereaux. I'm an assistant United States attorney with the Southern District of Texas. I need to speak with you about Sterling Kavanaugh." Imani did not move. An assistant United States attorney does not knock on your door on Thanksgiving unless the thing she needs to discuss is either urgent enough to justify the disruption or sensitive enough to require a setting that is not a federal building. "May I come in?" Imani stepped aside. Claudine entered, scanned the room, quickly, professionally, the way law enforcement scans rooms, checking exits and occupants and anything that is not where it should be. Her eyes stopped on Junho for 1 second longer than they stopped on anything else. Then she sat at the kitchen table, opened the portfolio, and laid a single document on the surface between them. This morning, the Department of Justice unsealed an indictment against Kavanaugh Corporation and 3 of its subsidiaries. The charges include wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and violations of the False Claims Act, specifically the submission of falsified minority contractor certifications on federally funded housing projects in Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio. The investigation has been ongoing for approximately 4 months. Imani looked at the document, then at Junho. He was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed and his face composed into the careful neutrality of someone who is watching a sequence of events unfold exactly as he expected them to. 4 months. The investigation had been ongoing for 4 months. The gala was 46 days ago, which meant the federal investigation into Kavanaugh Corporation had started months before Imani was assaulted, before the video, before the media coverage, before any of this became public. Someone had been building a case against Sterling Kavanaugh long before he slapped a pregnant woman at a charity gala. Imani's eyes went to the locked leather bag in the hall closet. She couldn't see it from where she was sitting, but she could feel it, the way you feel a door that you know is there even when the lights are off. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Claudine folded her hands on the table. "Because the indictment is going to become public within 48 hours, and when it does, the dynamics of your civil case will change significantly. Kavanaugh's legal team will be fighting a federal prosecution. Their resources will be divided. Their appetite for a prolonged civil battle will diminish. There may be opportunities for resolution that didn't exist before. Resolution meaning a settlement. I'm not your attorney, Ms. Okafor. I can't advise you on civil strategy. But I can tell you that when defendants are facing federal charges carrying penalties of up to 20 years per count, their priorities tend to shift. She stood, closed the portfolio, handed Imani a business card, plain, government issue, with the DOJ seal and a direct phone number. If you have any information that might be relevant to our investigation, any documents, communications, or observations related to the Kavanaugh Foundation's relationships with public institutions, I'd encourage you to contact our office, voluntarily, at your convenience. She walked to the door, paused, turned back. Ms. Okafor, one more thing. The confidential informant whose complaint initiated this investigation, their identity is sealed and will remain sealed. But I want you to know that the information they provided was extraordinarily detailed. Specific contract numbers, shell company registrations, internal communications that should not have been accessible to anyone outside Kavanaugh Corp's executive suite. She looked at Junho again. That 1 second too long look. We don't know who they are, but whoever they are, they knew exactly what they were doing. She left. The door closed behind her. The doorbell camera showed her walking to a government sedan parked 2 houses down. Parked, Imani noticed, on the opposite side of the street from the Hyundai Palisade that was still idling with its lights off. Imani stood in the kitchen. Her hands were on her belly, not because the baby was kicking, but because she needed to hold something, needed an anchor. You, she said. Not a question, not an accusation. A word placed on the table between them, like a key. Junho uncrossed his arms, walked to the kitchen table, sat in the chair that Claudine Devereaux had just vacated. His hands were flat on the table, palms down, fingers spread, the posture of a man who is about to tell the truth and wants his hands visible while he does it. Yes. The sealed complaint, the shell companies, the server access. That was you. Not me personally. People who work for me. People who are very good at finding information that powerful men believe is hidden. You've been investigating Kavanaugh for months, since before the gala, since before you and I ever heard his name at a dinner table. Since February, when his construction company started routing materials through a freight forwarder that operates in the port. The forwarder was laundering customs declarations, underreporting weights, misclassifying hazardous materials. My people flagged it. We looked deeper, found the minority contractor fraud, found the shell companies, found the falsified certifications. And you, what? Handed it to the feds? I handed it to someone who could hand it to the feds, through a channel that protects my involvement. The False Claims Act allows private citizens to file qui tam complaints under seal. The complainant is never identified publicly unless they choose to be. So you're the whistleblower. The complaint was filed by an attorney acting on behalf of an anonymous client. That's all the federal record reflects. Imani sat down. The baby kicked, hard, sudden, a protest or an announcement, or just the involuntary firing of muscles that had no idea what was happening in the room above them. Who are you, Junho? He was quiet for a long time. Long enough for the refrigerator to cycle on and off. Long enough for the Palisade across the street to switch off its engine and then start it again. I manage logistics, he said. That part is true. I manage the movement of goods through the Port of Houston, containers, cargo, the supply chains that connect manufacturers to markets. He paused, chose his next words with the precision of a man who understands that language, once released, cannot be recalled. But the logistics I manage are not all legal, and the authority I hold is not given by a corporation. It is given by an organization that has operated in Korean ports for 3 generations. An organization that my father led before me. an organization that the people in this city's law enforcement would describe using a word I have never used to describe myself, because the word reduces something complex to something simple, and I have never been simple. Say the word. Jopak. Korean organized crime. The word hung in the kitchen like smoke. Visible. Undeniable. Impossible to put back in the container it had come from. You're telling me that my husband is... I am telling you that the man who makes your breakfast and checks your locks and put his hand on your belly every night to feel his child move is the same man who controls a significant portion of the commercial shipping traffic in the fourth largest port in the United States. These are not contradictions. They are the same person. I am the same person. If this story just blew your mind, hit subscribe, because we are not even close to finished, and the people who tried to destroy this woman are about to find out exactly what they walked into. Imani did not speak for 4 minutes. She sat at the kitchen table, with her hands on her belly and her eyes on the man she had married, and the word he had spoken, and the locked leather bag she had never opened, and the 3 phones she had never asked about, and the visitors who came without names, and the car across the street that rotated every 12 hours, and the attorney who had appeared from nowhere with a monogrammed briefcase and a case file that looked like 3 weeks of work compressed into one. Every fragment she had filed under later, every observation she had catalogued without examining, every question she had deferred because the answer might require a decision she was not ready to make, assembled itself into a single coherent picture. And the picture was not what she had expected. It was not a betrayal. It was not a deception designed to exploit her. It was a parallel structure, a shadow architecture built alongside her visible life, constructed with the same precision that Junho brought to everything, designed not to entrap her, but to protect her from threats she had not known existed until one of them put his hand on her face. The attorney, she said, Yuna Beck, one of the best civil rights lawyers in Texas, and yes, she was recommended through my network, but her work is real, her representation is genuine, she has no knowledge of anything beyond your case, and her legal strategy is entirely her own. The car that followed me, the silver sedan. Not mine. That was Kavanaugh's people. Private security firm called Argent Protective. They do contract work for high net worth individuals who need problems watched. I had them identified within 2 hours. The firm was retained by Tate Renfro through a Kavanaugh Corp subsidiary. And the doorbell camera, the one that was removed. Removed by the same firm, replaced by my people, with a better camera. Imani closed her eyes. The baby kicked again. Rhythmic now, a pattern, like a heartbeat's echo transmitted through amniotic fluid and muscle and bone. I need to know one thing, she said. One thing, and I need the truth. And if you lie to me about this, I will take our child and walk out of this house tonight, and you will not find me. Ask. Have you hurt anyone? Because of me. Because of what happened at the gala. Have you, or anyone who works for you, caused physical harm to Sterling Kavanaugh, or anyone connected to him? No. Not a lie, not a technicality. No one has been hurt. No one has been hurt. The only weapons I have used against Kavanaugh are information and the legal system, the federal complaint, the evidence provided to investigators, the attorney referral, the protective surveillance. That is all. She opened her eyes, looked at him, searched for the lie. In his eyes, in the set of his mouth, in the micro-expressions that 3 years of marriage had taught her to read the way she read fetal heart tracings. She found nothing. Either he was telling the truth, or he was better at lying than anyone she had ever met. She chose to believe him, not because the evidence was conclusive. It wasn't. But because she was 33 weeks pregnant and targeted by a billionaire and fighting on 4 fronts simultaneously, and the man sitting across from her had built a wall of protection around her that she could not afford to dismantle, regardless of what that wall was made of. Okay, she said. He reached across the table, took her hands, held them the way he always did, gently, firmly, with the particular combination of tenderness and control that she now understood was not a contradiction, but a signature. The hands of a man who could be soft and hard simultaneously, who had learned to hold things without breaking them, because breaking things was easy, and holding them was the skill that mattered. "Okay," he said. The next 6 weeks were a controlled demolition. The federal indictment went public on November 28th, 14 counts across 4 entities: wire fraud, conspiracy, False Claims Act violations. The penalties, if convicted, included fines of up to $250,000 per count and imprisonment of up to 20 years per count. Sterling Kavanaugh was not personally named in the indictment. The charges targeted the corporation and its subsidiaries, but the implication was clear, and the business press treated it as a foregone conclusion that individual charges would follow. Kavanaugh Corp's stock dropped 11% in 2 days. 3 board members resigned. The Houston chapter of the NAACP issued a statement pointing out that the falsified minority contractor certifications had diverted federal funds intended for minority-owned businesses and called for a broader audit of the company's government contracts. A real estate analyst quoted in the Financial Times described the situation as a controlled burn that's about to become a wildfire. Tate Renfro, the general counsel who had sent the cease and desist letter and filed the SLAPP counterclaim and retained a private security firm to follow a pregnant woman home from the grocery store, resigned from Kavanaugh Corp on December 3rd, citing personal reasons. 3 days later, the State Bar of Texas notified him that a complaint had been filed against him for potential violations of Rule 404 of the Texas Disciplinary Rules of Professional Conduct, threatening criminal or administrative action solely to gain advantage in a civil matter. The complaint had been filed by Unibeek in October. It had taken 6 weeks to process. The State Bar moved slowly, but it moved. At Houston Memorial, the consequences arrived with the institutional precision of a system protecting itself. An internal review, initiated not by conscience but by the hospital's outside counsel, who had calculated the liability exposure of the amended federal complaint and found the numbers alarming, concluded that the 3 anonymous complaints against Imani had been unsubstantiated and that her administrative reassignment had been premature. The review recommended that the complaints be expunged from her personnel file and that the hospital implement additional safeguards in its patient safety reporting system to prevent anonymous submissions from a single workstation. The review did not name Jolene Marsh, did not recommend discipline, did not acknowledge the $15,000 in foundation payments or the connection between those payments and the timing of the complaints. The review was, in every measurable way, the minimum response required to reduce the hospital's legal exposure without actually holding anyone accountable. Imani read the review findings, set them down, picked up her phone. "Una, the hospital's internal review cleared me. Complaints expunged. No discipline for Marsh." "Expected," Una said. "Hospitals protect the institution first, the employees second, and the truth a distant third. But the expungement is useful. It undermines any argument that the complaints had merit, which strengthens our retaliation claim. And the Texas Board of Nursing investigation is still open. That one isn't controlled by the hospital's lawyers." "How long?" "Board investigations take 6 to 12 months, sometimes longer. The wheels of professional accountability turn slowly, but they do turn." On December 9th, Jolene Marsh was placed on paid administrative leave. Not fired. That would require a formal finding of misconduct, which the hospital's internal review had carefully avoided producing. Just leave. Paid. Indefinite. The institutional equivalent of being asked to stand in the hallway while the adults decided what to do. Imani heard about it from Sandra, who delivered the news with an expression that combined satisfaction and frustration in equal measure. Satisfaction that something had finally happened. Frustration that it was not enough. "Paid leave," Imani said. "Paid leave," Sandra confirmed, "which means she keeps her benefits, her seniority, and her seat on the Kavanaugh Foundation's advisory board. She just doesn't have to show up. And when the leave ends? Transfer, probably, to another unit, another hospital in the system. Somewhere she can't do this again. or somewhere she can, just to someone else. The pattern was familiar. The system's self-protection mechanism operating exactly as designed. Denial first, then quiet separation, then reassignment, then the comfortable fiction that the problem had been addressed. Not accountability, just relocation. December 15th. The baby came. 3 weeks early. 37 weeks. Technically term, but barely. The kind of delivery that happened on its own schedule, regardless of the chaos surrounding it. Imani's water broke at 4:22 a.m. in the bathroom of the townhouse in Midtown, and for the first time in 2 months, the world narrowed to something simple and urgent, and entirely physical. Junho drove her to the hospital, not Houston Memorial. They had discussed this in the quiet, practical conversations that happened between legal crises, and had agreed that delivering at the hospital where she had been reassigned and surveilled and retaliated against was not an option. They went to St. Luke's instead, the same ER where Dr. Reina Vasquez had documented the bruise on her face 2 months ago. Full circle. The delivery was 10 hours. Uncomplicated. A boy. 6 pounds, 11 ounces. He came into the world at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, crying the way all babies cry. Loud, bewildered, furious at the sudden brightness and cold air and the incomprehensible fact of being alive. Junho held him, standing beside the bed in a sterile gown with his sleeves pushed up, holding his son in both hands, the same hands that managed shipping containers and deployed surveillance teams and handled phones that contained information that could destabilize a billionaire's empire, holding a 6-pound baby with a tenderness so complete that Imani, watching through the haze of exhaustion and relief and the particular euphoria that follows childbirth, thought, "This is the real him. Everything else is what the world made. This is what he chose." They named him Dae-jung. It meant great and righteous in Korean. Imani had chosen it from a list Junho's mother had sent. His mother, whom Imani had spoken to on the phone but never met, who lived in Busan and ran a seafood market and knew nothing, as far as Imani could determine, about the other things her son ran. Or knew everything. Mothers were like that. The hospital room was quiet. Dae-jung slept on Imani's chest, his face pressed against her skin, his breathing so light it was almost inaudible. The Palisade was parked in the hospital lot. She had seen it from the window of the labor room, a constant presence that she no longer questioned because questioning it required energy she did not have and answers she was not sure she wanted. Yuna called the next morning. "Congratulations. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck. A beautiful 6-pound, 11-ounce truck." Yuna laughed. A brief, genuine sound that was rare enough from her that Imani noticed it. Then her voice shifted back to the register that meant business. 2 developments. First, the Harris County District Court granted our anti-SLAPP motion. Kavanaugh's counterclaim is dismissed. We've been awarded attorney's fees, $17,000, which Renfro's former firm will be responsible for. Second, the DA's office has finally moved. A grand jury has been convened to hear evidence on the assault charge. Texas Penal Code Section 22.01, subsection B, paragraph 3. Third-degree felony. Sterling Kavanaugh has been notified through his new legal counsel, Renfro's replacement, a woman named Margaret Sung from Baker Botts, that an indictment is expected within the month. Expected, not guaranteed. Grand juries were not trials. They heard only the prosecution's evidence, and the standard was probable cause rather than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The old saying was that a prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich, but the old saying left out the part where the ham sandwich was a billionaire with a legal team from one of Houston's most prestigious firms, and the prosecutor was an elected official who needed campaign donations to keep her job. "Do you think they'll actually indict?" Imani asked. "I think the video makes it very difficult not to. 200 witnesses. A medical record documenting the injury, a 911 call with a contemporaneous report, and 400,000 social media impressions that guarantee every voter in Harris County knows this case exists. The DA can't bury it without burying herself." January 11th. 3 months since the gala. Dae-jung was 27 days old. The Harris County grand jury returned an indictment against Sterling Kavanaugh on 1 count of assault, causing bodily injury to a pregnant person, a third-degree felony under Texas Penal Code Section 22.01b3, carrying a sentence of 2 to 10 years in state prison. Kavanaugh was booked at the Harris County Jail at 8:45 a.m. Photographed. Fingerprinted. Released on a $250,000 bond within 90 minutes, a bond that represented less than what he spent on his wine collection in an average year. But the booking photograph existed now. The fingerprints existed. The record existed. And records, unlike narratives, could not be managed by lawyers or erased by donations or softened by the particular alchemy of wealth that turns crimes into misunderstandings. Imani saw the booking photograph on her phone while she was feeding Dae-jung in the rocking chair by the window. Sterling Kavanaugh, front-facing, in a gray booking smock, with an expression that tried very hard to project composure and achieved instead the particular look of a man who has realized, for the first time in his life, that the rules apply to him too. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she closed her phone, shifted Dae-jung to her other arm, and continued feeding him. Justice, such as it was, had arrived. Late and incomplete and dressed in the bureaucratic language of booking numbers and bond conditions and court dates that would stretch across months or years before anything resembling a resolution emerged. But it had arrived. The criminal case would take 14 months to reach a plea agreement. Kavanaugh's attorneys would negotiate, delay, file motions, request continuances, and deploy every procedural tool available to a defendant with unlimited legal resources. The eventual plea, reached in March of the following year, would be to a reduced charge of Class A misdemeanor assault, 1 year of probation, a $25,000 fine, mandatory anger management counseling, and a protective order prohibiting contact with Imani Okafor and her family. No prison time. The prosecutor would call it a just outcome that holds the defendant accountable. The defense would call it a resolution that reflects the totality of circumstances. Neither description would be entirely honest. The civil case would settle 3 months after the plea. The terms were confidential, sealed by mutual agreement, with a non-disclosure provision that prevented both parties from discussing the amount. What was known, through filings and court records that could not be sealed, was that Kavanaugh Corporation agreed to terminate Jolene Marsh's consulting contract and dissolve the community advisory board that had connected the foundation to Houston Memorial's nursing staff. The foundation agreed to establish an independent oversight committee for its charitable programs, with membership selected by a panel that did not include anyone employed by or financially connected to Kavanaugh Corporation. These were structural changes. Small, incremental, unglamorous structural changes, the kind that made no one's blood boil and appeared in no viral videos and would be forgotten by everyone except the people directly affected and the lawyers who had spent 14 months fighting for them. But they were real, and they were documented, and they would survive the news cycle and the public's attention span, and the inevitable drift of collective memory that turns outrages into anecdotes and anecdotes into silence. At Houston Memorial, the Texas Board of Nursing completed its investigation in September of the following year, 11 months after Imani's original complaint. The board's findings were 53 pages long and concluded that Jolene Marsh had engaged in unprofessional conduct by filing knowingly false patient safety reports from a workstation to which she had exclusive access during the relevant time periods. The board imposed a formal reprimand, a 2-year probationary period on Marsh's nursing license, and a requirement to complete 20 hours of continuing education in professional ethics. A reprimand, not a suspension, not a revocation. A reprimand, the professional equivalent of a stern letter, which would appear on Marsh's license record if anyone looked it up, but which would not prevent her from practicing, from being hired, from moving to another city and another hospital and another unit where no one knew her history and no one would think to check. Imani read the board's findings at the kitchen table. Dae-jung was sleeping in the carrier on her chest, his face pressed against her collarbone, his body warm and heavy, and entirely unaware of the document his mother was reading. "Formal reprimand," she said to Junho, who was sitting across from her with his tea and his phone. One phone now, not three. He had consolidated after the conversation on Thanksgiving, a gesture she understood as symbolic rather than operational. "Better than nothing," he said. "Is it?" "It's a record. She can't erase it. Every future employer who checks her license will see it. Every hospital that hires her will know what she did. And every hospital that doesn't check won't know. That's the system, Imani. It doesn't do what we want it to do. It does what it was designed to do, which is protect itself first and everyone else second. You changed the record. That's not nothing." She looked at him, at the man who had built a parallel justice system alongside the one that had failed her, not because the official system didn't matter, but because it wasn't enough. Because the distance between what was just and what was possible was measured in dollars and connections, and the willingness of institutions to sacrifice individual accountability for institutional survival. She thought about Claudine Devereaux, the federal prosecutor who had sat at this table on Thanksgiving and laid an indictment on the surface between them. The federal case against Kavanaugh Corporation was still active. A consent decree had been entered requiring an independent compliance monitor for 3 years, restitution of $4.7 million in improperly obtained federal contracts, and the establishment of a genuine minority contractor certification program with third-party verification. 2 Kavanaugh Corp executives had pled guilty to wire fraud charges and received sentences of 18 and 24 months respectively. Sterling Kavanaugh himself had not been charged in the federal case. The evidence, while suggestive, had not established his personal knowledge of the fraudulent certifications beyond the standard required for individual criminal liability. He had walked. On the federal charges, at least, he had walked. His corporation had paid. His executives had gone to prison. His name had been in the newspapers, and his booking photograph had circulated on the internet, and his foundation had been restructured, and his general counsel had been reported to the state bar. But Sterling Kavanaugh, the man himself, the man whose hand had connected with the left side of a pregnant woman's face in front of 200 witnesses, had received 1 year of probation and a $25,000 fine, which was less than the cost of the watch he had been wearing on the night he struck her. This was justice. American justice. The kind that arrived slowly, incompletely, wearing the gray suit of institutional procedure, carrying a settlement agreement in one hand and an expungement motion in the other. The kind that asked you to be grateful for the pieces it offered, because the alternative, no pieces at all, was the historical norm. Captain Bryce Underhill retired from HPD in January, 3 months after the indictment. His retirement was described in the department's press release as voluntary and in recognition of 30 years of distinguished service. No mention was made of his handling of the Okafor complaint. No mention of the Kavanaugh Foundation's $50,000 donation to the Police Officers Union. No mention of the lost security footage or the 9 days of investigative delay or the directive to Detective Sato to coordinate with the venue's legal counsel before pursuing evidence. Detective Sato transferred to the Homicide Division. Imani never spoke to her again. But 6 months after the transfer, Sato sent an email to Imani's personal address, not her hospital email, that contained a single sentence and no signature. "For what it's worth, you were the bravest person I interviewed in 12 years as a detective." Imani saved the email, added it to the file. Not as evidence. The file's evidentiary purpose was finished, but as a record, a reminder that inside the machinery of institutions that had failed her, there had been individual people who saw what was happening and cared, even when caring was the professionally dangerous choice. Margot Lydon left the Kavanaugh Foundation in February. Her LinkedIn profile listed her new position as Director of Development at a nonprofit in Austin. Imani did not look at the profile more than once. Some people were instruments rather than architects. They did what the structure required of them, and removing the structure did not make them better, only unemployed. And Junho. The question of Junho. He had kept his promise. In the weeks after Thanksgiving, in the spaces between feeding the baby and changing diapers and navigating the exhausting, beautiful mundanity of new parenthood, he had told her. Not everything. There were things, he said, that he could not disclose without endangering people whose safety depended on his silence. And she accepted this the way she accepted the locked bag in the closet, which was still there, which she had still never opened. But he told her enough. He told her about his father, who had run the port operations in Busan before him. About the organization. Not a gang, he insisted, though he acknowledged that the distinction mattered more to him than it would to the law. About the shipping routes and the customs brokers and the freight forwarding companies that formed the invisible infrastructure of his authority. About the things he moved that were legal and the things he moved that were not, and the complicated moral arithmetic that governed the boundary between the two. He told her about the photographs of Sterling Kavanaugh, about the 6 months of surveillance, about the original purpose, which was not personal, not about Imani, but about the fraudulent certifications and the laundered customs declarations and the larger pattern of corruption that Kavanaugh Corp's operations had created in the port. And he told her the thing she most needed to hear, which was also the thing she found hardest to believe, that he had not orchestrated the gala, had not engineered the confrontation, had not arranged for his pregnant wife to be in the same room as a man he was already investigating for federal fraud. The gala had been a coincidence, the random intersection of two timelines that should never have crossed, producing a collision that had changed everything. She wanted to believe him. Some days she did. Other days she lay awake at 3 a.m. with Dae-jung asleep beside her, and Junho's breathing steady in the dark, and the question pressing against the inside of her skull like a headache. Was it really a coincidence? Was any of it a coincidence? She did not have an answer. Might never have one. The file in her bag, the one with the documents and the timelines and the color-coded matrix, could prove what had happened. It could not prove why. Some questions, she was learning, did not have answers. Only recordings, only timestamps, only the slow, grinding, imperfect machinery of a system that was not designed to deliver justice but occasionally, under pressure, produced something close enough to justice that you could mistake it for the real thing if you didn't look too closely. March. Dae-jung was 3 months old. Imani went back to work full-time. The labor and delivery unit felt different without Jolene Marsh. Quieter, less performative, the way a room feels when the person who was always watching has stopped watching. Sandra had been promoted to assistant director of nursing. Terrence, the union rep, had used the Okafor case to push for a revision of the hospital's anonymous complaint policy, requiring dual workstation verification and a 48-hour review period before complaints were added to personnel files. The revision was approved by the board in February. Whether it would be enforced, consistently, rigorously, in the face of pressure from donors and administrators who preferred the old system's opacity, remained to be seen. Imani delivered a baby at 7:32 a.m. on her first day back. A girl, 8 pounds 2 ounces. The mother was 23, first pregnancy, terrified and euphoric in equal measure. Imani held her hand through the final push. Placed the baby on her chest. Watched the mother's face transform the way all mothers' faces transform in that moment. The pain replaced not by its absence, but by something larger, something that consumed the pain the way sunlight consumes shadow. She documented the delivery. Vitals, APGAR scores, estimated blood loss, cord status, placental integrity, clinical language for a transcendent event. The language that hospitals required because hospitals ran on data, and data required precision, and precision required a distance from the emotional reality of what had just happened, that Imani had long ago learned to maintain, without losing the feeling underneath. She clocked out at 7 p.m. Drove home. Junho was at the table with Dae-jung in the carrier on his chest, reading something on his phone. One phone, the blue one with the cracked screen protector. The kitchen smelled like doenjang jigai. The shoes by the door were lined up left to right in order of size. The window locks had been checked. She sat down, took Dae-jung from Junho's chest, held him against her own, felt his heart beating, fast, the way infant hearts beat, 140 beats per minute, the same rate she had heard on the fetal monitor during all those months when he was inside her and the world outside was trying to break her. The world had not broken her, had not broken Junho, had not broken the small, kicking, crying, sleeping, breathing fact of Daejung, who existed in spite of everything, in spite of the slap and the bruise and the false complaints and the silver sedan and the locked leather bag and the federal indictment and the plea deal that gave a billionaire probation for striking a pregnant woman. Daejung existed. He was warm. He was breathing. He was here. That was not justice. But it was something. She put her hand on his back, felt it rise and fall, closed her eyes. 2 months later, on a Tuesday evening in May, Imani was sorting mail at the kitchen table when she found an envelope with no return address. Plain white, hand-addressed, her name in block capitals, no title, no postage, which meant it had been placed in the mailbox by hand, not sent through the postal service. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of what appeared to be an internal email, the headers redacted with black marker so thick that the paper was slightly raised where the ink had been applied. The body of the email was 3 sentences long. The footage from cameras 6 and 8 was not lost due to technical malfunction. It was deleted at 11:47 p.m. on October 11th by user admin_TR. Backup exists on the offsite server but has not been subpoenaed. Admin_TR. The initials matched Tate Renfro. The date was the night of the gala. The cameras, 6 and 8, were the cameras covering table 14. The footage existed. It had always existed. It had not been lost. It had been deleted, deliberately, within 3 hours of the assault, by the man whose job was to make the evidence disappear. And somewhere, on an off-site server that no one had thought to subpoena because everyone believed the footage was gone, the backup waited. 31 seconds of shaky phone video had produced 2.3 million views. The venue's professional cameras, covering the incident from 2 angles with high-definition audio, would produce something else entirely. Imani set the paper down, looked at it for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Yunabaek. "I just received something," she said. "I don't know who sent it, but I think you need to see it." She did not call Junho, did not need to. The envelope had no return address, but it had a particular quality, a precision, a deliberateness, a sense of information arriving at exactly the right moment through exactly the right channel that she had learned to recognize. She looked at the palisade across the street. It was gone. Had been gone for 2 weeks, actually. She had noticed its absence the way you notice the absence of a sound you had grown accustomed to. No more 12-hour rotations. No more watchful perimeter. Either the threat had passed or the protection had become invisible. She looked at the envelope again, at the block capitals spelling her name, at the photocopy with the redacted headers and the 3 sentences that changed everything and nothing simultaneously, because the footage existing meant the evidence was available. But evidence being available and evidence being used were 2 different things, separated by the distance between what the law allowed and what the system was willing to do. She put the paper in the file. The file was thick now, heavy, real. Then she closed the file, put it in the drawer, picked up Daejung, who had started fussing in his bassinet, held him against her chest, walked to the kitchen where Junho was making dinner. Galbi tonight, the smell of soy and sesame filling the house, with something that was not safety exactly, but was close enough to safety to feel like home. The kitchen light was on. The shoes were lined up by the door. The locks were checked. Outside, the street was quiet. The palisade was gone. The silver sedan had not returned. The Houston night settled over the townhouse in Midtown like a hand on a sleeping child's back, present, steady, warm. But somewhere on an off-site server, behind a firewall that no one had yet breached, and a backup protocol that no one had yet subpoenaed, 31 minutes of high-definition footage from cameras 6 and 8 waited in the dark. The footage showed everything. The water, the jacket, the words, the slap, the hand going to the belly, the 200 faces that watched and the zero faces that moved. It would be found. Eventually. When the next case was filed, or the next investigation opened, or the next person with the right access and the right motivation decided that the truth was worth more than the silence that was supposed to contain it. Or it wouldn't. And the backup would sit on the server, degrading slowly, losing fidelity bite by bite, until the drive failed, or the data was overwritten, or the company that operated the server went under and the hardware was sold for scrap. That was the thing about evidence. It existed whether or not anyone looked at it. The truth did not require an audience to be true. It just sat there, in the dark, on a server, in a file, in the memory of 200 people who had watched a man strike a woman and chosen, in that moment, the safety of silence over the risk of witness. Some of them were still choosing, would always be choosing. The choice renewed itself every morning, in every room where power asserted itself, and bystanders calculated the cost of intervention against the comfort of looking away. Imani was not looking away, had never looked away, would not look away. But she was also not waiting for the system to deliver what it had already demonstrated it could not reliably deliver, not waiting for the footage to be found, or the investigation to reopen, or the plea deal to be revised, or the board of nursing to discover that a reprimand was insufficient for a woman who had weaponized a safety system to punish a colleague for being assaulted. She was going to work, delivering babies, holding hands, documenting everything with the methodical precision of a woman who had learned that the difference between a story and evidence was a timestamp and a signature, and the willingness to write things down when writing things down was the hardest and most necessary thing a person could do. She was going home, feeding her son, sitting at the kitchen table across from a man whose hands had held shipping manifests and burner phones and their child's bottle with equal steadiness, whose double life was no longer a secret but a fact she was learning to live beside, the way you learn to live beside a river, respecting its power, appreciating its beauty, never quite forgetting that it could rise. And she was keeping the file. In the drawer. In the house. Ready. Because the footage was still out there. And the redacted email was still unexplained. And the question of whether the gala had truly been a coincidence was still unanswered. And the system that had produced this outcome, probation for a billionaire, a reprimand for a saboteur, a retirement with honors for a captain who had buried a complaint, was still operating, still grinding, still protecting the people it was designed to protect at the expense of the people it was designed to serve. Imani knew this, accepted it, did not forgive it. She put Dae-jung in his crib, checked the monitor, walked to the kitchen. Junho had finished cooking. The table was set. 2 places, chopsticks parallel, handles pointing right. The kitchen light was on. The locks were checked. She sat down. He sat across from her. They ate in the comfortable silence of a marriage that had survived things most marriages never encounter and emerged not unscathed but intact, held together by breakfast rituals and window locks and the small, stubborn daily acts of care that are not the same as trust but are, perhaps, the soil from which trust grows. After dinner, Junho washed the dishes. Imani dried. They worked side by side, passing plates and bowls between them without speaking, the way couples do when the work is familiar and the silence is not empty but full. Full of everything they had said and everything they hadn't, and everything that was still waiting, in files and on servers, and in the spaces between what they knew and what they could prove. The kitchen light went off. The house went dark. The street was quiet. And in the nursery, Dae-jung slept, his fists curled, his mouth open, his breathing so light it was barely audible over the hum of the monitor, dreaming whatever newborns dream about in the first months of a life that had been fought for before it began. His mother had fought for it, with documentation and evidence and the exhausting, unglamorous procedural machinery of a legal system that rewarded patience and punished hope. His father had fought for it, with resources and networks and the shadow infrastructure of a world that operated by different rules and produced different results and existed in a moral territory that neither of them had fully mapped. Between them, Between the file in the drawer and the locked bag in the closet, between the law's slow grinding and the port's dark efficiency, between what was documented and what was done, their son slept. Safe. For now. And in the dark, on an off-site server that no one had yet subpoenaed, the footage waited.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.